Arranged by blood and vows. A dark Mafia romance. Prologue. The rain came down in sheets, turning Madison Avenue into a river of broken reflections. I pressed my body against the cold brick wall of the alley, counting my breaths like rosary beads. 1, 2, 3, stay calm. 4, 5, 6, he's just a stranger asking for directions. But strangers don't block both exits. You look lost, sweetheart. The first man stepped closer, rain plastering his dark hair to his skull. Behind him, his companion, taller, silent, moved to cut off my escape route toward Fifth Avenue. I'm not. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Just waiting for the rain to stop. In an alley. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. That's a dangerous place for a girl like you. Girl like you. The phrase made my skin crawl. I'd heard it before, whispered in boardrooms when men thought I couldn't hear, muttered by my father's business associates when they assessed me like livestock, used by Marco Vitale when he'd looked at me across the negotiation table and decided I was worth acquiring. 3 days. That's all I had left before the wedding that would turn me from Sienna Blackwood into Mrs. Marco Vitale, the wife of New York's most dangerous crime boss. A transaction wrapped in white lace and called a union. I'd run because I needed to breathe. Because my father's estate felt like a mausoleum, and his guards felt like jailers, and the wedding dress hanging in my closet felt like a death shroud. Now, cornered in this alley by men who wore cheaper suits but carried the same threat in their eyes, I understood the lesson my father had been teaching me all along. There was no such thing as freedom. Only the choice of which cage to inhabit. My phone. I held it up with shaking hands. You can have it. My wallet too. We don't want your money. The first man's smile widened. We want you to deliver a message. Before I could ask what message, before I could scream, his fist connected with my stomach. Air exploded from my lungs. I doubled over, gasping, and another blow caught my cheekbone. The world tilted sideways. Rain and pavement rushed up to meet me. Tell Vitale, the first man said, his voice seeming to come from very far away, that the Russo family doesn't forget. Tell him we know about the wedding. Tell him his bride isn't as protected as he thinks. Another kick, this one to my ribs. Pain exploded white-hot through my chest. I tried to curl inward, make myself smaller, invisible. But invisibility only worked when you hadn't been specifically targeted. 3 days, the man continued, crouching beside me. His breath smelled of cigarettes and something sour. That's what you have left before you become his property. Consider this a wedding gift. A reminder that Vitale's empire is built on bodies, and yours might be next. They left me there, bleeding into puddles that reflected the city lights like shattered glass. I don't know how long I lay there. Long enough for the rain to wash most of the blood from my face. Long enough for the pain to settle into something almost manageable if I didn't breathe too deeply. My phone was gone. My wallet too. But they'd left me alive, which meant this wasn't about robbery. It was about sending a message. To Marco, to my father, to everyone who thought an arranged marriage could cement peace between warring families. The Rousseau family had just declared that peace was an illusion. I pushed myself upright, biting back a sob as my ribs screamed in protest. My face felt swollen, my lips split. When I touched my cheekbone, my fingers came away red. The wedding was in 3 days. 3 days until I walked down an aisle toward a man I'd met exactly twice, both times in conference rooms with lawyers present. 3 days until I became the wife of a monster. All because my father's gambling debts and poor business decisions had left him desperate enough to sell his daughter like a medieval princess. I'd run tonight because I'd wanted one last moment of autonomy. One last breath of air that didn't taste like resignation.
Instead, I'd learned that running was pointless. The Russos had found me. If they could find me, anyone could. My father's guards, Marco's men, every enemy who wanted to hurt the Vitale Empire through its newest acquisition. I stumbled out of the alley onto Madison Avenue, one hand pressing my ribs, the other wiping blood from my eyes. A cab stopped, and the driver took one look at me and pulled away without a word. Another one. Same result. Finally, a black SUV pulled up. The window rolled down, and I found myself staring at a man I'd never seen before, late 30s, silver threading his dark hair, eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Blackwood," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. My throat tightened. "I don't know you." "Franco Santoro, Mr. Vitale's head of security." He got out, opened the back door. "Get in." "I don't." "You don't have a choice. Your father called Mr. Vitale 20 minutes ago, frantic because you disappeared. We've had people looking for you all over Manhattan." His expression was unreadable. "It seems we weren't the only ones." I climbed into the SUV because standing in the rain with broken ribs and a split lip seemed like a worse option than whatever waited inside. Franco got back behind the wheel and pulled into traffic with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. "Mr. Vitale wants to see you." I look like I lost a fight with a brick wall. "You look like you were attacked by Russo's men." Franco's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "Which is exactly why Mr. Vitale wants to see you. The wedding is in 3 days, Miss Blackwood. What happened tonight just moved up his timeline for ensuring your safety." My safety. As if I were a possession that needed protecting rather than a person who needed freedom. We drove through the city in silence, rain drumming against the roof, while I pressed one hand to my throbbing ribs and tried not to think about the wedding dress waiting at home, about walking down the aisle toward a man I didn't know, about becoming a wife to seal a contract written in blood and desperation. The SUV finally stopped in front of the building I recognized from photographs, Vitale Tower, the gleaming monument to Marco Vitale's empire. 30 stories of glass and steel in the heart of Manhattan, housing everything from legitimate businesses to the kinds of operations that never appeared on tax forms. Franco escorted me through a private entrance to an elevator that required a key card. We rode to the top floor in silence. When the doors opened, I stepped into a penthouse that looked like something from a magazine, all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, art that probably cost more than my father's estate. And standing by those windows, silhouetted against the glittering skyline, was Marco Vitale. I'd met him twice, both times in conference rooms, with my father present and lawyers drafting contracts. Both times, he'd been perfectly controlled, dark suit, dark eyes, dark reputation. He looked at me the way someone might look at a painting they were considering purchasing, assessing, calculating, determining value. Now, as he turned to face me, I saw something different in his expression, something that made my breath catch despite the pain in my ribs. Fury, not at me, at what had been done to me. Who did this? His voice was quiet, controlled, but I heard the violence underneath, felt it like electricity in the air. I don't know their names. I touched my swollen cheek gingerly. They said they were delivering a message that the Russo family doesn't forget. Marco's jaw tightened fractionally. He closed the distance between us in 4 measured steps, and suddenly he was too close, near enough that I could smell cedar and something darker, more expensive. His hand came up to my face, tilted my chin toward the light with surprising gentleness. "You need a doctor." "I need to go home." "You need a doctor," he repeated, not angry but absolute, the voice of someone who expected obedience and received it. "Franco, called Dr. Moretti. Tell him it's urgent." "I'm fine," I said, even as speaking made my split lip throb. "I just want—" "What you want," Marco interrupted, his dark eyes meeting mine, "is to pretend this didn't happen, to go home and hide and hope that running away again will somehow change what's coming in 3 days. His thumb traced the edge of the bruise on my cheekbone with unexpected care. "But it won't. The Russos made their move tonight. They proved you're vulnerable, and that makes you a liability I can't afford. I'm not your liability yet." The words came out sharper than I intended. "The wedding is in 3 days. Until then, I'm still my father's problem." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, that I'd push back. "You became my concern the moment your father signed a contract, the moment you agreed to become my wife." "I didn't agree. I was sold." "Yes," he said simply. "You were." But that doesn't change what happens now. He released my face and stepped back. You'll stay here tonight. Dr. Moretti will examine you. Tomorrow, we'll move your things from your father's estate to the guest suite on the floor below this one. The wedding is in 3 days. I'm supposed to. The wedding is canceled. The words landed like a physical blow. I stared at him, trying to process what he just said. What? The Russos just prove they can reach you whenever they want. Every day you remain at your father's estate, every public appearance, every moment between now and when you're legally under my protection, it's all exposure, all risk. He moved to his desk, pressed a button on the phone. We're moving up the timeline. The wedding happens tomorrow. You can't just... I can. He looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. The contract gives me authority over your safety the moment there's a credible threat. The Russos attacking you qualifies. Your father will agree because he needs his alliance more than he needs to maintain the illusion of traditional ceremony. Tomorrow, the word echoed in my head, drowning out everything else. Not 3 days. Not even a final weekend of pretending I had any choice in this. Tomorrow, I will become Mrs. Marco Vitale. Sit down, Marco said, not unkindly. You look like you're about to fall over. I sat because my legs were shaking and my ribs screamed with every breath, and because standing felt like the last rebellion I had left, and I was too tired to maintain it. Marco watched me with that assessing gaze, like he was cataloging every micro-expression, every visible wound. Then he did something unexpected. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter and handed me one. Drink. I took it because arguing seemed pointless. The whiskey burned going down, but it cut through some of the shock, the cold that had settled into my bones. I know what you think of me, Marco said quietly, settling into the chair across from mine. What you think this is. A transaction. A business deal where you're the commodity being traded. Isn't it? Yes. He didn't flinch from the truth. But that doesn't mean I'll allow you to be hurt. Whatever else this marriage is, you'll be protected. That's not negotiable. Protected like a prisoner. Protected like my wife. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't expect you to love me, Sienna. I don't even expect you to like me. But I do expect you to understand that from tomorrow forward, your safety is my responsibility. And I take my responsibilities very seriously. A knock came at the door. Franco entered with an older man carrying a medical bag. Dr. Moretti? Presumably. He examined me with professional efficiency, prodded my ribs until I gasped, checked my pupils, cleaned the cut on my lip. Fractured rib, he announced. Possibly 2. Significant soft tissue damage. She needs rest and monitoring for the next 48 hours. She'll have it, Marco said. Dr. Moretti left prescriptions and instructions, and then I was alone with Marco again. He stood by the windows, staring out at the city, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked almost tired, human underneath the carefully controlled facade. I didn't want this, I said into the silence. Any of this. I know. He didn't turn around. But we rarely get what we want. We get what we're given, and we decide whether to survive it or let it destroy us. And which did you choose? Both. He glanced back at me. I survived by becoming the thing everyone feared, build an empire on violence, and carefully maintain power. And somewhere along the way, the empire destroyed the person I might have been. He paused. But it kept my family safe. It gave me control in a world designed to take it away. So I don't regret it. I wanted to hate him. Wanted to see only the monster my father had warned me about, the crime boss who'd built his fortune on blood and fear. But sitting there in his penthouse, drinking his whiskey while my body throbbed with evidence of his enemy's hatred, I saw something more complicated. A man who'd been forced into his role the same way I'd been forced into mine. Tomorrow, I said finally, after the wedding, what happens then? Then you learn to live in my world. Learn the rules, the dangers, the people who want to hurt me through you. His expression was unreadable. And I learned how to be a husband to a woman who had no choice in becoming my wife. That doesn't sound like the beginning of a fairy tale. No, he agreed. But fairy tales are for people who don't live in our world. We get something different, something harder, but possibly more real. Franco returned to show me to the guest suite. It was beautiful, of course, all cream and gold and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. A room designed to be a cage, even if the bars were made of silk and luxury. I stood at the window, looking down at the city below, and touched my swollen cheek. Tomorrow, I would marry a stranger, would become the wife of a man who commanded violence with a word, would step into a world where running meant death and staying meant surrender. The Russos had tried to send me a message tonight. They wanted me to know I was vulnerable, exposed, a target anyone could reach. What they'd actually taught me was something else entirely. That freedom was an illusion. That safety came with a price. And that tomorrow I would pay in full by walking down an aisle toward a man I didn't love but might need to survive. I touched the window, my reflection staring back at me. Bruised, swollen, but alive. Still here. Still breathing. Tomorrow, I would become Mrs. Marco Vitale. And God help me, I didn't know whether that was salvation or damnation. Chapter 1. The morning after yesterday. The dress arrived at dawn. I woke to the sound of rustling fabric and hushed voices in the sitting room of the guest suite. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Didn't remember the attack, the SUV, Marco's penthouse. Then I tried to sit up, and my ribs reminded me with sharp, breathtaking clarity. Miss Blackwood. A woman's voice, soft and professional. I'm Helena, Mr. Vitale's personal stylist. May I come in? I pulled the silk robe over the borrowed pajamas someone had left on the chair last night. Yes. Helena entered with 3 assistants, all of them carrying garment bags and boxes that looked expensive even before they were opened. She was perhaps 50, with silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon, and the kind of posture that suggested ballet training. Mr. Vitale asked me to prepare you for this afternoon. She assessed me with a glance that missed nothing. The bruise on my cheekbone, the swelling around my eye, the way I held my left side. The ceremony is at 2:00. City Hall, private room. Just immediate family and witnesses. City Hall, not the cathedral my father had reserved. Not the reception for 300 guests. Not the elaborate wedding I'd been dreading, but at least would have felt traditional, normal, like something other than exactly what it was. I had a dress, I said, at my father's house. Mr. Vitale felt that dress represented expectations that no longer apply. Helena opened the first garment bag. He asked me to find something more appropriate for the reality of what today is. What emerged from the bag made my breath catch. It wasn't white. It was ivory silk with a high neck and long sleeves, elegant but simple, designed to cover rather than reveal. The kind of dress that whispered money, without shouting it. And more importantly, it would hide every bruise the Russos had left on my body. It's beautiful, I admitted. It's strategic. Helena's expression softened slightly. Everything today is about sending messages, Miss Blackwood. What you wear, how you look, who sees what. Mr. Vitale understands that better than most. Her assistants transformed the suite into a makeshift salon. They worked around my injuries with professional care, makeup to hide the bruising, though not so much it looked like I was hiding something. Hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of my neck, while drawing attention away from the swelling at my temple. By the time they finished, I looked like someone else, someone composed, someone who'd chosen this rather than been forced into it. You wear suffering well, Helena observed as she made final adjustments to the dress. Most women try to hide pain. You let just enough show to make people uncomfortable. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. She met my eyes in the mirror. In Mr. Vitale's world, everything communicates. Weakness, strength, submission, defiance. What you project today will set the tone for how people treat you going forward. And what should I project? That's for you to decide. She stepped back, examining her work. But I'd suggest this. You're not a victim. You're a survivor who's choosing her battles. The words settled into my chest like stones. Choosing her battles. As if I had any choice at all. Marco appeared at noon, knocking twice before entering. He'd changed into a dark suit that probably cost more than a car. looking every inch the powerful crime boss the tabloids love to speculate about. His eyes found mine immediately, scanning my face with the same assessing intensity he'd shown last night. How do you feel? Like I'm getting married in 2 hours to a man I don't know. I turned from the mirror to face him. How do you feel? Something that might have been humor flickered across his expression. Like I'm marrying a woman who doesn't trust me not to make her life hell. Should I trust you? No. He crossed the room with measured steps, stopping just close enough to feel intentional. You should be smart, careful, and always aware that I'm dangerous. But you should also know I don't hurt what's mine. I'm not yours yet. In 2 hours you will be. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside sat a ring that made my stomach tighten. A flawless solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones, set in platinum. Traditional, beautiful, completely at odds with what this marriage actually was. My grandmother's, Marco said quietly, the only woman in my family who died peacefully in her sleep rather than violently. My grandfather gave this to her when they married in Naples 60 years ago. She wore it until the day she died. He slipped it onto my finger before I could protest. It fit perfectly, of course, because Marco Vitale was the kind of man who knew everything about the people he acquired, down to their ring size. I could have your father's estate cleared out this afternoon, he continued, his thumb brushing over the ring he'd just placed. Everything you own moved here, but I thought you might want to retrieve personal items yourself. Maintain some illusion of control. The casual mention of control, the acknowledgement that it was only an illusion, made my throat tight. When, after the ceremony, we'll go together. You'll pack what you want, say whatever goodbyes need saying, and then you'll come back here. His dark eyes held mine. To your new home. This isn't a home. It's a fortress. Yes. He didn't deny it. But it's a fortress where no one will hurt you the way the Russos hurt you last night. That's worth something, isn't it? Before I could answer, Franco appeared in the doorway. Cars are ready, Mr. Vitale. Your father just arrived. Marco's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes. When Franco left, I asked the question that had been building since last night. Why are you doing this? Moving up the wedding, protecting me like I'm more than just a business transaction? Because the Russos attacked you to send me a message. His voice dropped to something cold and lethal. They wanted to show they could reach anything connected to me, that my empire has cracks they can exploit. He touched my bruised cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. What they actually did was give me permission to respond without restraint. And the first response is making sure you're legally under my protection before they try again. So this is about your reputation. This is about keeping you alive. He withdrew his hand, which happens to also protect my reputation. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. The cars waiting downstairs were exactly what I expected. Black SUVs with tinted windows, driven by men who wore suits but carried guns. Marco helped me into back of the middle vehicle, his hand steady on my elbow, careful to avoid my injured ribs. We drove through Manhattan in a convoy, 3 SUVs moving in formation, like a presidential motorcade. I watched the city slide past through tinted glass and tried to remember the last time I felt truly free. Before my father's debts came due, before my mother died and left me alone with a man who loved money more than his daughter? Or had I ever been free at all? You're thinking too much, Marco observed without looking at me. I'm getting married in an hour. I think I'm entitled to think. Thinking implies you have choices to consider. He finally turned to face me. You don't. Neither of us do. So instead of thinking, maybe just breathe. Is that what you do? Just breathe through the terrible things you have to do. No. His expression was unreadable. I make peace with the terrible things I want to do. That's different. City Hall loomed ahead, all classical architecture and the weight of civic authority. But we didn't go to the main entrance where couples normally gathered for their happy courthouse weddings. Instead, Franco led us through a side door up a private elevator into a room that looked like it had been designed for exactly this purpose. Discreet ceremonies for people who needed official documentation without public spectacle. My father waited inside, looking older than I remembered. The last 3 months had aged him, gray threading his dark hair, new lines around his eyes, shoulders that carried the weight of debts he couldn't pay and choices he couldn't take back. Sienna, he crossed me, hands reaching for my shoulders, then stopping when he saw my face. Christ, they told me you were hurt, but I didn't realize. It's fine. I stepped back before he could touch me. Just bruises. The Russos will pay for this. But his voice lacked conviction, and we both knew it. My father couldn't make anyone pay for anything anymore. That's why I was here, wearing a dead woman's ring, and preparing to marry a stranger. Marco's father arrived next, Antonio Vitale, older version of his son, with the same dark eyes and the same air-controlled violence. He assessed me with a glance that felt clinical, like I was livestock being evaluated for breeding potential. She's prettier than the photograph suggested, he said to Marco, not to me. Good bone structure. She'll produce attractive children. She's also standing right here, I said before I could stop myself. Antonio's eyebrows rose. Marco's expression remained carefully neutral, but something shifted in the air between us. Tension, maybe, or the beginning of a test. She has spirit, Antonio observed. That's either going to serve you well or make your life hell, son. Probably both, Marco replied evenly. The officiant entered, a tired-looking woman in her 60s who probably performed 1,000 of these ceremonies and stopped believing in the romance of marriage somewhere around ceremony number 50. She had us stand before her, positioned us like chess pieces, and began the ceremony with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. I stopped listening. Focus instead on staying upright despite my throbbing ribs, on keeping my expression neutral despite wanting to scream. On the way to the ring Marco had placed on my finger and what it represented, a chain, a cage, a carefully constructed prison made of legal documents and family obligations. Do you, Marco Antonio Vitale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. His voice was steady, absolute. The officiant turned to me. Do you, Sienna Blackwood, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? The room fell silent. My father held his breath. Antonio Vitale watched me with predatory focus. Marco's expression remained unreadable, but his dark eyes held mine with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. I could say no, could refuse, walk out, let my father drown in his debts, and take whatever consequences came. Could choose poverty and uncertainty over this gilded cage. But the Russos had taught me something last night in that alley. Freedom was an illusion. There was no such thing as independence in a world controlled by men like Marco Vitale and Antonio and my father. There was only the choice of which monster to align yourself with. And Marco, at least, had promised to keep me alive. I do, I said. The words felt like surrender, like signing my own death warrant, like the end of one life and the beginning of something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for yet, but could feel pressing down on me like water, like drowning, like inevitability. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, the officiant continued, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Marco stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my uninjured cheek with surprising gentleness. For just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Not love, nothing so simple as that, but something almost like understanding, like he knew exactly what this cost me and was acknowledging it without apology. Then he kissed me. It was careful, controlled, appropriate for a public ceremony in front of our fathers and witnesses. But underneath the propriety, I felt something else. Heat, promise, the suggestion of what might come later when we were alone, and the careful masks we wore could fall away. When he pulled back, I was Mrs. Marco Vitale. The paperwork happened in a blur. Signatures, witnesses, official stamps that made it legal and binding. My father hugged me stiffly, whispered an apology I didn't acknowledge. Antonio clapped Marco on the shoulder and said something in Italian I didn't understand. Then we were back in the SUV, driving through the city as husband and wife, and the weight of what I'd just done settled over me like a shroud. "Where are we going?" I asked when we didn't turn toward the tower. "Your father's estate." Marco glanced at me. "You need to pack. Say goodbye. Close that chapter of your life." "You mean cut ties with the only home I've ever known?" "I mean transition from being Thomas Blackwood's daughter to being my wife." His tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. Those are different things. Different obligations, different protections, different rules. The estate looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown in the hours since I'd run from it last night. The guards at the gate waved us through. They knew who Marco was, of course. Everyone knew who he was. My bedroom felt like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. All my things arranged exactly as I'd left them, but already feeling distant, irrelevant. The wedding dress still hung in the closet. The elaborate white gown I'd been supposed to wear, the one that represented the traditional ceremony that would never happen now. "Do you want it?" Marco asked from the doorway. He'd given me space to pack alone, but I hadn't made much progress. Just stood there staring at evidence of the girl I'd been yesterday. "The dress?" I touched the fabric. "No, it's not mine anymore. It was meant for someone who believed in fairy tales." "And you don't, do you?" He considered this seriously. "I believe in carefully constructed alliances, in strategic partnerships, in building something strong enough to withstand the people who want to destroy it." He moved into the room, and suddenly the space felt smaller. "Fairy tales are for people who don't know how the story really ends." I packed mechanically after that. Clothes, books, photographs of my mother, personal items that couldn't be replaced. Marco watched in the chair by the window, occasionally directing his security team when they came to collect boxes. "Your father wants to see you before we leave," he said after an hour. "He's in his study." I found my father exactly where I expected, behind his desk, surrounded by evidence of the empire he'd built and then lost through poor decisions and worse luck. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw genuine grief in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that means nothing. I know I failed you. But Sienna, I need you to understand I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not when you owe money to people who'll kill your family if you don't pay." He stood, moved around the desk. "The Vitales offered to clear my debts in exchange for an alliance. It was the only way to keep you safe." Safe. I laughed, but was bitter. I was attacked last night by the Russos. I have broken ribs and a face that looks like it lost a fight with a brick wall. This is your definition of safe. You're alive. His voice broke. And you're under Marco Vitale's protection now. That's more safety than I could ever provide. He was right, of course. That's what made it worse. That selling me off to a crime boss was actually the best option he had. The most protection he could offer. The only way to ensure I survived in a world where his debts had made me a target. "I don't forgive you," I said quietly. "I understand why you did it, but I don't forgive you. I don't expect you to." He pulled an envelope from his desk drawer. "This is everything I have left that's worth anything. Bonds in your mother's name, some jewelry, the deed to her family's cabin upstate. It's not much, but it's yours, hidden away where creditors can't reach it." I took the envelope because it was the last piece of my mother I'd ever receive. "Goodbye, Dad." "This isn't goodbye. You'll visit, will..." "No." I met his eyes. "I misses Marco Vitale now. That's what you wanted. That's what you made happen. But it means I live in his world now, not yours. This is goodbye." I left before he could respond, before I could see whether he'd cry or rage or simply accept what I'd said as the price he'd agreed to pay. Marco waited by the SUV, and when he saw my face, he asked no questions. Just helped me into the vehicle and gave orders to his driver in Italian. We drove back to the tower in silence. The sun was setting by the time we arrived, painting the city in shades of gold and blood red. Marco led me not to the guest suite I'd occupied last night, but to a different floor entirely, one accessed by a private elevator that required his handprint to operate. The doors opened onto a space that took my breath away, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. An open floor plan that somehow felt intimate despite the size. Furniture that suggested someone actually lived here rather than just existed in carefully staged luxury. The master suite, Marco said. Our suite now. The possessive pronoun made my stomach tighten. Where do you want my things? Wherever you want them. He gestured to the hallway. There's a walk-in closet, a private bathroom, an office if you need space to work or think. This is your home now, Sienna. Arrange it however you like. Home. The word felt wrong in my mouth. This wasn't home. This was headquarters, command center, the place from which Marco Vitale ran an empire built on violence and carefully maintained fear. But it was also where I would sleep tonight, where I would learn to be a wife to a man I'd married out of necessity rather than choice, where I would figure out how to survive in a world that wanted to use me as a weapon against him. Marco poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. To survival, he said, raising his glass. Is that what we're toasting? It's the only thing worth toasting on a day like today. He drank, and I followed suit because arguing seemed pointless. We stood by the windows as darkness fell over the city. 2 strangers bound by legal documents and family obligations, trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without destroying each other. You can sleep in the guest room if you prefer. Marco said eventually, I won't force anything. The marriage is legal whether or not we share a bed tonight. Is that what you want? Separate rooms? I want you to feel safe. He turned to face me fully. Everything else can wait until you're ready. Something in his voice, the careful control, the way he was giving me choice in the only area where he could, made me realize he understood more than I'd given him credit for. This wasn't about desire or consummating the marriage. This was about power, control, and letting me keep the small pieces of autonomy I had left. I'll stay, I said, in here, with you. You don't have to. I know. I set down my wine glass. But I'm tired of running. Tired of pretending this is something other than what it is. We're married. This is our life now. Hiding in separate rooms won't change that. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Then welcome home, Mrs. Vitale. Mrs. Vitale. My new name, my new identity. The woman I become the moment I said, I do. In a sterile room at City Hall. I touched the ring on my finger. His grandmother's ring, the one symbol of something that had lasted in a family known for violence and early deaths. Wondered if Marco and I would build something that lasted, or if we destroy each other trying. Outside, the city glittered like broken glass, and I realized I was exactly what I'd become. Something sharp and dangerous, forged in the shattered pieces of the girl I used to be. Marco Vitale had married a stranger today. Tomorrow, we both discover who that stranger actually was. Chapter 2, The Weight of Vows. I woke to unfamiliar darkness and the scent of cedar. For a disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was, didn't remember the wedding, the vows, the way Marco had shown me to our bedroom, and then disappeared into his office to handle business that couldn't wait. I'd fallen asleep alone in silk sheets that cost more than my entire wardrobe, wearing borrowed pajamas because I hadn't thought to pack my own. Now, pale light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a room I barely recognized in daylight. Modern, masculine, with dark wood and leather and art that probably belonged in a museum. The bed beside me was empty, but had clearly been slept in. Sheets rumpled, pillow indented. My husband had slept next to me, and I hadn't even known it. The thought made my stomach tighten. Not from fear exactly, but from the sudden awareness of how vulnerable I'd been. How he could have done anything while I slept, drugged on pain medication and exhaustion. But he hadn't. I found him on the terrace, drinking espresso and reading something on his tablet. He'd already dressed. Dark slacks, white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking every inch the powerful businessman rather than the crime boss. When he heard the door open, he glanced up, and something in his expression softened fractionally. How do you feel? Like I got married yesterday to a man I don't know. I crossed to stand beside him at the railing, looking down at the city spread 30 stories below, and like my ribs still hurt. Dr. Moretti said that would last another few weeks. He poured a second espresso from the silver service on the table and handed it to me. You need to keep taking the medication. even when you think you don't need it. The espresso was perfect, strong, slightly bitter, exactly how I preferred it. Of course he knew. Marco Vitale made it his business to know everything about the people in his world, and I was very much in his world now. What happens today? I asked. Today, you rest and recover. Tomorrow, we start teaching you how to survive. Survive what? My world. He set down his tablet and turned to face me fully. Yesterday, the Russos attacked you to send me a message. That makes you a target, Sienna. Not just for them, but for everyone who wants to hurt me, weaken my position, or take what I built. You need to learn how to protect yourself. I know how to protect myself. You know how to survive in your father's world. Boardrooms, charity galas, the polite warfare of Manhattan society. His dark eyes held mine. But you don't know how to survive when someone put a gun to your head and asks where your husband keeps his money. You don't know what to do when you're grabbed off the street and used as leverage. You don't know the difference between allies who'll die for you and enemies who smile while planning your death. The casual mention of violence, as if kidnapping and murder were inevitable rather than theoretical, made my throat tight. And you're going to teach me? Franco is going to teach you. Self-defense, threat assessment, how to identify danger before it becomes lethal. He paused. I'm going to teach you everything else. The families, the alliances, who to trust and who to fear. The rules of this world and the consequences of breaking them. Sounds like prison with extra steps. It's the opposite of prison. His voice took on an edge. Prison is being vulnerable and unaware. Freedom, real freedom, comes from understanding your environment well enough to navigate it safely. Before I could respond, Franco appeared in the doorway. Mr. Vitale, your father is here. He says it's urgent. Something flickered across Marco's expression. Irritation, maybe, or resignation. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes. When Franco left, Marco turned back to me. Eat something. Rest. I'll be back this afternoon, and we'll start going over the basics. He hesitated, then added, If you need anything, tell Franco. He has orders to provide whatever you require. Even if what I require is to leave, you can't leave. Not angry, just absolute. Not yet. Not until we're certain the Russos won't try again, and not without security. Those are negotiable terms, Sienna. Your safety is my responsibility now. He left before I could argue, and I was alone on the terrace with expensive espresso and the weight of what I'd agreed to yesterday. Mrs. Marco Vitale, a wife in name, a hostage in practice, learning to navigate a world where violence was an exception but a fundamental rule. Franco found me an hour later in the library I discovered while exploring the penthouse. It was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in multiple languages, leather furniture worn soft with use, windows overlooking the city. The kind of room that suggested someone actually read rather than just collected impressive volumes for show. Mrs. Vitale, Franco said, and the name still sounded wrong in my ears. I wanted to introduce myself properly. Yesterday was chaotic. That's one word for it. I set down the book I'd been pretending to read. Something in Italian I couldn't understand. Thank you for finding me that night, in the rain. I was doing my job. He settled into the chair across from mine with the easy confidence of someone who'd known Marco for years. But I want you to understand something. My job is keeping Mr. Vitale's interests protected. As of yesterday, you became one of those interests. That means your safety is my responsibility. How reassuring. I'm an interest. You're more than that, whether you realize it yet or not. Franco's expression was unreadable. I've known Marco since he was 22. Since his father handed him an empire he didn't want and told him to survive. I've watched him build that empire into something formidable. And in all those years, I've never seen him move up a wedding by 3 days because someone got hurt. He did that for strategic reasons. The Russos proved I was vulnerable. He did it because he saw your face and wanted whoever hurt you to pay. Franco leaned forward. Marco is many things, ruthless, calculating, willing to do terrible things to maintain power. But he doesn't care about people. Not really. He cares about obligations, responsibilities, maintaining what he's built. Except yesterday when he saw you bleeding. He cared about something else entirely. You're wrong. I'm a transaction. A contract he signed to secure an alliance. Keep believing that if it helps you sleep at night. Franco stood. But when this gets complicated, and it will, remember what I said. You're not just a transaction to him. You never were. He left me alone with those words echoing in my head, trying to reconcile the Marco who'd kissed me carefully at City Hall with a man who ordered violence as casually as ordering coffee. Marco returned in the late afternoon, looking tired in a way I hadn't seen before. His jacket was gone, tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. Your father? I asked when he entered the library. Wants to renegotiate the terms of our agreement. He poured himself a drink from the bar cart. Whiskey. Neat. Seems to think that because you're my wife now, he deserves more consideration, more protection, more of everything. And what did you tell him? That the agreement was honored the moment you said, I do, and any additional considerations would need to be purchased at current market rates. He drank, then met my eyes. Your father is drowning, Sienna. His debts run deeper than you know. The Russos are just one faction he owes. There are others, Russian, Chinese, independent operators who don't care about family alliances or carefully maintain peace. He's going to keep asking for help until someone decides he's not worth keeping alive. The casual assessment of my father's mortality made my chest tight. And will you help him? That depends. On what? On whether helping him serves my interests. On whether you ask me to. He set down his glass and crossed to where I sat. I told you yesterday, you're my wife now. That means I protect you, provide for you, ensure your safety above almost everything else. But it also means you have influence you didn't have before. If you want your father protected, I'll consider it. But I need to know what you want. I thought about my father, the man who'd raised me, who'd loved my mother in his way, who'd made terrible choices and worse decisions, but had ultimately sold me off to keep me alive. Thought about whether he deserved protection, or whether justice meant letting him face the consequences of his actions. I don't know what I want, I admitted. He's still my father, but he also treated me like property. He did what he thought necessary to survive. Marco's expression was unreadable, just like you did when you said, I do, yesterday. Just like I did when I accepted his offer. We're all surviving in our own ways, Sienna. The question is whether we're willing to help each other survive, or whether we're each on our own. Is that what this is? A partnership. It's whatever we make it. He touched my bruised cheekbone with surprising gentleness. I can't give you love. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I can give you safety, stability, the resources to build whatever life you want within the boundaries of mine. That's not nothing. No, it wasn't nothing. But it also wasn't what I'd imagined when I thought about marriage as a girl. Wasn't the fairy tale, the romance, the choosing someone because you couldn't imagine life without them. Teach me, I said suddenly, everything you promised. The families, the alliances, how to survive. If I'm going to be your wife, I need to understand your world. Something that might have been respect flickered across his expression. Then let's start now. He led me to his office, a space I hadn't seen before, all dark wood and leather and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The desk dominated the room, covered in papers and files that probably contained more secrets than the FBI would ever uncover. Marco pulled out a leather-bound book and opened it to reveal not pages but photographs. Faces, names, notes written in tight, precise handwriting. This is my world, he said. 5 families control Manhattan. The Vitales, my family, hold the West Side from Chelsea to the Upper West Side. We control real estate, legitimate businesses that front less legitimate operations, and most importantly, we control access to the ports. He pointed to the first photograph, a man in his 60s with white hair and cold eyes. Antonio Vitale, my father. He built this empire from the remnants of what my grandfather started. He's ruthless, calculating, and he sees people as resources to be utilized or eliminated. He likes you because you're pretty and come from old money. But he'll discard you the moment you stop being useful. Comforting. It's reality. Marco flipped to the next page. The Russos, they hold the East Side. Old French money. They've been in New York since the 1800s. They're our primary competitors and the ones who attacked you. The photograph showed a man perhaps 40, with dark hair and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Philippe Rousseau, current head of the family. He's smart, patient, and willing to wait years for the right opportunity to strike. The attack on you was his way of testing boundaries, seeing if I'd gone soft. And have you? That's what everyone wants to know. He met my eyes. The answer is no, but they'll keep testing until they're convinced. He continued through the book. The Chun family controlling Chinatown, the Volkov family with their Russian operations in Brighton Beach, the independent operators who worked the gaps between territories. Each face had a story, a history of violence and carefully maintained alliances, betrayals, and blood feuds that stretched back generations. Why are you showing me this? I asked when we reached the end. Because you need to know who you're dealing with. Every person you meet from now on will be evaluating you, assessing whether you're a weakness they can exploit or a strength they need to respect. He closed the book. Franco will teach you physical defense. But this, he tapped the leather cover, this is how you really survive, by understanding the landscape well enough to navigate it without getting killed. A knock came at the door. Franco entered, his expression grim. We have a situation. The Rousseaus just hit one of our operations in Queens. 3 dead, $500,000 in merchandise gone. Marco's jaw tightened fractionally. When, 20 minutes ago, Philippe is claiming it's retaliation for what happened last year, but the timing suggests it's about something else. It's about her. Marco stood, his entire demeanor shifting from husband to crime boss in a heartbeat. They attacked her to test me. I responded by moving up the wedding and putting her under my protection. Now they're hitting my operations to prove they can still hurt me. He turned to me. Stay here. Don't leave the penthouse. Franco, double the security. Marco, I started. This isn't negotiable. His voice was cold, absolute. They're escalating because I married you. That makes you a target. Until I handle this, you don't go anywhere without a security team. Understood? I wanted to argue, to demand he treat me like a partner rather than property. But the look in his eyes stopped me. Not anger exactly, but something colder, more dangerous. The part of him that had built an empire on violence and wasn't about to let anyone threaten it. Understood, I said. He left with Franco, and I was alone in his office, surrounded by evidence of the world I'd married into. A world where violence was currency, where lives were traded like stocks, where my value was measured entirely by how much damage someone could do to Marco Vitale by hurting me. I returned to the library because I didn't know what else to do. Found myself staring at the book Marco had shown me, at the faces of people who wanted to use me or kill me or both. Try to memorize names, connections, the complicated web of alliances that kept this world from descending into open warfare. The sun set outside the windows, painting the city in shades of gold and blood. Hours passed. Marco didn't return. I found wine in the kitchen, a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to, and poured a glass. Then another, sat in the darkening library, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. 2 days ago, I'd been my father's daughter, trapped but at least familiar with my cage. Now I was Marco Vitale's wife, learning to navigate a world where violence wasn't an exception but a rule, where my safety came at the cost of other people's blood, where love was a weakness and protection looked a lot like possession. The door opened around midnight. Marco stood silhouetted against the hallway light, looking every inch the dangerous man everyone feared. His shirt was splattered with something dark, blood, probably. His knuckles were raw. Is it handled? I asked. It's handled. He moved into the room, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of whatever he'd done tonight. The Rousseaus won't hit our operations again. Not for a while. Because you hurt them back. Because I made it clear that hurting what's mine has consequences they can't afford. He poured himself a drink, drained it in one swallow. 3 of my men died tonight, Sienna. 3 people with families, with lives, with futures. They died because Philippe Rousseau wanted to prove a point about my marriage. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be aware. He turned to face me. This is what loving me costs. This is what being my wife means. People will die because of choices I make, and some of those choices will be about protecting you. You need to decide if you can live with that. I thought about the men who'd attacked me in the alley, about the casual cruelty in their eyes, about waking up in pain and fear, and knowing I was completely vulnerable. Thought about Marco offering protection, safety, the resources to survive in a world that wanted to destroy me. I can live with it, I said, if the alternative is ending up like those men who died tonight. Casualties in someone else's war. Something in his expression softened. Then, come here. I crossed the room slowly, my ribs protesting each step. When I reached him, he pulled me against his chest with surprising gentleness, one hand cradling the back of my head, the other careful on my injured side. I won't let anyone hurt you, he murmured into my hair. Not the Russos, not my father, not anyone. Whatever else this marriage is, you're under my protection. That's not negotiable. I should have felt trapped by those words, by the possessiveness, by the way he claimed me like property. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Something warm and dangerous that had no place in a marriage built on contracts and family obligations. Safety. For the first time since my mother died, I felt genuinely safe. We stood like that for a long time. Two strangers bound by vows and violence, learning how to exist in the same space without destroying each other. Outside, the city glittered like broken glass, and I realized we were just like it, sharp, dangerous, forged from shattered pieces into something new. Come to bed, Marco said eventually. Tomorrow, the real work begins. I followed him to our bedroom, let him help me out of my clothes with careful efficiency, like I was something precious that might break if handled too roughly. We climbed into silk sheets side by side, and for the first time since the wedding, I fell asleep next to my husband. Woke once in the darkness to find his arm around my waist, his body curled protectively around mine, and let myself feel what I'd been fighting since the moment I'd said, I do. Relief, gratitude, and underneath it all, something that felt dangerously close to trust. Mrs. Marco Vitale. That's who I was now. Tomorrow, I'd figure out what that actually meant. Chapter 3. Learning to Survive. The training began at dawn. Franco appeared in the bedroom doorway at 6 a.m., looking entirely too alert for someone who'd probably been up as late as Marco handling the Russo situation. I was already awake, had been for an hour, watching the city brighten through floor-to-ceiling windows, while Marco slept beside me, one arm still draped possessively across my waist. Mrs. Vitale, Franco said quietly, we start in 30 minutes. Gym on the 4th floor, where something you can move in. Marco stirred beside me, his eyes opening slowly. Too early, Franco. You told me to start her training immediately. Immediately begins now. Franco's expression was unreadable. The Russos aren't going to wait for her to be ready. Neither can we. After Franco left, Marco pulled me closer, his face buried in my hair. You don't have to do this today. Your ribs are still healing. You said, I need to learn to survive your world. I turned in his arms to face him. That starts now, broken ribs or not. Something that might have been pride flickered across his expression. Then be careful. Franco's a good teacher, but he doesn't believe in going easy on people. I don't want easy. I want effective. He kissed me then, the first real kiss since our wedding ceremony. Not careful or controlled, but something deeper, more demanding. His hand slid into my hair, angling my head for better access, and I tasted coffee and something darker, more dangerous. When he pulled back, we were both breathing hard. For the record, he said quietly, I'm very glad my father forced me to marry you. Forced. I would have chosen differently if given the choice. Would have kept my distance, maintained professional boundaries. His thumb traced my lower lip. But I would have been an idiot. You're more than I expected, Sienna. More than I deserved. The admission made my chest tight. We barely know each other. I know you said, I do even though it costs you everything. I know you're standing here planning to train with broken ribs because you refuse to be a victim. I know you drink your espresso black and read Italian even though you don't speak it and organize books by author without being asked. He paused. I know enough. I wanted to ask what that meant, what we were becoming, whether this marriage could be more than a transaction. But Franco was waiting, and the Russos were still out there, and I needed to learn how to protect myself before I could worry about whether my husband might actually care about me. The gym occupied an entire floor of the tower, state-of-the-art equipment, practice mats, even a shooting range behind reinforced glass. Franco waited in the center of the space, wearing athletic clothes that made him look less like a security chief and more like a soldier. "Ground rules," he said without preamble. "First, I'm going to hurt you. Not badly, but enough to teach you what real violence feels like. You can't learn to defend yourself if you've never experienced actual physical threat. I was beaten unconscious 3 days ago. I think I understand violence. You understand being a victim. That's different." He gestured to the mats. "Come at me. Try to hit me however you want." I hesitated, acutely aware of my healing ribs, the lingering pain that flared with certain movements. Franco waited with infinite patience, and finally I lunged forward, swinging at his face with my right fist. He moved like water, smooth, effortless, redirected my momentum so I stumbled past him. Before I could recover, his arm locked around my throat from behind, not tight enough to choke, but firm enough to make the threat clear. "You're dead," he said in my ear. "That's how long you survived. 3 seconds." He released me, and I staggered forward, pulse hammering. Again. We went through it a dozen times. Each time, I tried a different approach. Kicking, grabbing, try to use my smaller size to my advantage. Each time, Franco put me down with embarrassing ease, demonstrating exactly how vulnerable I was. By the end of the hour, I was sweating, my ribs screaming, my pride in tatters. "Good," Franco said, completely unbothered. "Now you understand how much you don't know. That's the first lesson, awareness of your own limitations." Comforting. "It's reality." He handed me a water bottle. Most self-defense training teaches you moves that look good, but don't work against someone who actually wants to hurt you. I'm going to teach you something different. How to survive long enough to escape or for help to arrive. How to identify threats before they become lethal. How to think like someone who wants to kill you. We spent the next hour on basics. How to break a chokehold. Where to strike to cause maximum damage. How to use everyday objects as weapons. Franco was methodical, patient, demonstrating each technique multiple times before having me practice. "Your advantage isn't strength," he explained. "It's speed and unpredictability. Men like the ones who attacked you expect women to freeze, to submit. You need to do the opposite, become more dangerous than they expect." Around 9, Marco appeared in the doorway, dressed for business in a suit that probably cost more than a car. He watched us for a moment, expression unreadable, then crossed to where I stood catching my breath. "How is she?" he asked Franco. "Stubborn." "That's good. Means she'll actually practice instead of giving up." Franco demonstrated a move on me, showing Marco how I'd learned to redirect someone trying to grab my arm. "She needs to build muscle memory. That takes time. Time we may not have." Marco's jaw tightened. "Philippe Rousseau just requested a meeting. Says he wants to discuss terms." "It's a trap." "Probably, but refusing makes us look weak." He looked at me. "Get cleaned up. You're coming with me." To a meeting with the man whose people beat me unconscious? To a meeting where we establish that you're not a weakness to be exploited. Where we show Philippe that attacking my wife has consequences he can't afford. His dark eyes held mine. And where you learn how these negotiations actually work. 2 hours later, I sat beside Marco in the back of an SUV, wearing a dress that somehow made me look both elegant and dangerous. Black silk, high neck to hide any remaining bruises, fitted enough to show I wasn't hiding weapons, but expensive enough to communicate power. Philippe chose neutral ground. Marco explained as we drove through Manhattan. A restaurant in Midtown. He knows I won't attack. Too public, too many witnesses. And if he attacks us? He won't. Not yet. Marco's hand found mine, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. But stay close to Franco. If anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. That's not negotiable. The restaurant was the kind of place where reservations required knowing someone who knew someone. Understated elegance. staff who moved like dancers, clientele who wore wealth like armor. We were escorted to a private room in the back, and my stomach tightened when I saw who waited. Philippe Rousseau was exactly as intimidating in person as in his photograph. Dark hair, the scar through his eyebrow, eyes that assessed me like I was livestock being evaluated for purchase. 2 men flanked him, both carrying guns poorly concealed under expensive suits. Mr. Vitale, Philippe said, standing. His eyes slid to me, and the new Mrs. Vitale. I must say, the photographs don't do you justice. Philippe, Marco's voice was ice. You requested this meeting. State your business. Always so direct. Philippe gestured to the chairs across from him. Please sit. Let's be civilized about this. We sat, Franco positioning himself behind us, ready to move if needed. Philippe poured wine with movements that were deliberately casual, offering glasses Marco, and I both declined. I wanted to extend my congratulations on your marriage. Philippe began, a union between the Vitale and Blackwood families. Quite strategic. Your father must be pleased, Mr. Vitale, to have secured such an advantageous alliance. Get to the point. The point is that certain misunderstandings have occurred recently. Actions taken by members of my organization without my explicit approval. His eyes found mine. I was disturbed to learn that someone attacked Mrs. Vitale. That was never my intention. Your men wore your colors, Marco said flatly. They invoked your name. Don't insult me by pretending you weren't involved. I was involved in sending a message. The violence that followed was excessive, unauthorized. Philippe sipped his wine. I'm here to offer compensation. $50,000 and a formal apology. The number hung in the air between us. $50,000, more than most people earned in a year, offered as casually as someone might tip a waiter. You think my wife's safety is worth $50,000? Marco's voice had dropped to something cold and deadly. I think mistakes were made on both sides. My men overstepped. Your men responded by killing 3 of mine and destroying $500,000 in merchandise. Philippe's expression hardened. I'm offering a path to peace, Mr. Vitale. A way to de-escalate before this becomes a war neither of us can afford. I watched Marco's face, saw the calculation happening behind his dark eyes. This was a test. Philippe wanted to see if marriage had made him soft, if having a wife meant he'd accept terms he would have rejected before. No, Marco said finally. Philippe's eyebrows rose. No, you attacked my wife to test boundaries, to see if I'd gone soft, if Brooklyn had stretched me too thin, if having someone I care about protecting made me vulnerable. Marco leaned forward. The answer is I'm not soft. I'm more dangerous now because I have something worth protecting, and that makes your $50,000 and your apology worthless. Then what do you want? I want your word, in front of witnesses, that no member of your organization touches anyone connected to me. Not my wife, not my businesses, not the people who live in my territory. You overstep those boundaries again, and we stop pretending this is about diplomacy. The silence that followed was suffocating. Philippe studied Marco with cold calculation, then shifted his gaze to me. Your husband drives a hard bargain, Mrs. Vitale. I hope you're worth it. I hope you never find out, I said before I could stop myself. Something flickered across Philippe's expression. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. She is spirit. That's either going to serve you well, Mr. Vitale, or make your life hell. Probably both. Marco stood, offered me his hand. Do we have an agreement? Philippe considered for a long moment, then nodded. You have my word. No one connected to the Vitale family will be touched by my organization without cause. Without cause was a loophole you could drive a truck through, but Marco accepted it with a slight nod. We left the restaurant in silence, Franco staying close until we were back in the SUV. That went better than expected. Franco observed once we were moving. That was a prelude, Marco corrected. Philippe gave his word because he's not ready for open war yet, but he'll keep testing, keep pushing, until he finds a weakness he can exploit. And will he find one? I asked. Marco's hand found mine again, lacing our fingers together. Not if I can help it. We returned to the tower to find Antonio Vitale waiting in Marco's office. He looked up when we entered, his eyes tracking to our joined hands with an expression I couldn't read. "Father," Marco said without warmth, "what are you doing here? I heard about your meeting with Philippe Rousseau." Antonio stood, moving with the careful control of someone who'd survived decades in a violent world. "I wanted to ensure you hadn't done anything foolish." "Foolish how?" "By prioritizing your new wife over business interests." Antonio's gaze slid to me, dismissive. "Sentiment makes you weak? Son, the Rousseaus are testing you because they smell blood in the water. They think marriage has made you vulnerable. Marriage has made me more motivated to protect what's mine." Marco's voice was cold. "That's not weakness. It is if it makes you accept terms you wouldn't have accepted before." Antonio moved closer. "Philippe offered compensation. You should have taken it, pocketed the money, and moved on. Instead, you issued ultimatums that paint you into a corner. I established boundaries. That's different. You let a woman influence your decisions." Antonio's expression hardened. "I gave you this empire, Marco. Don't throw it away because you've developed feelings for a girl your marriage was supposed to be purely strategic." The tension in the room was suffocating. I felt Marco's hand tighten around mine, felt the anger radiating off him in waves. "This conversation is over," Marco said quietly. "You can see yourself out." "Son, get out." Not loud, but absolute. The voice of someone who'd built his own power and wasn't about to let his father undermine it. "Now." Antonio left, but not before shooting me a look that made my skin crawl. When the door closed behind him, Marco released my hand and moved to pour himself a drink. "I'm sorry," I said into the silence. "Don't apologize for him being an ass." Marco drained the whiskey in one swallow. "He's right about one thing, though. The Rousseaus smell blood. They think you're my weakness." "Am I?" He turned to face me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "Yes, but you're also making me stronger in ways he can't understand. Ways I didn't expect." "How?" "By giving me something worth fighting for beyond just maintaining power." He crossed back to me, cupping my face with both hands. "I've spent 12 years building an empire I inherited, doing what was expected, making the choices my father would have made, surviving by becoming the thing everyone feared." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "But I never wanted any of it. Not really. It was just obligation. And now I have a reason to want it. Because keeping this empire strong keeps you safe. Because the power I built means no one can touch you without facing consequences they can't afford." He kissed me, deep and demanding. "You've made me want to be more than just my father's son. You've made me want to be worthy of the choice you made when you said, 'I do.'" The admission made my chest ache. "I didn't have a choice." "You did. You could have said no, could have let your father drown, could have chosen poverty over this." His forehead rested against mine. "But you didn't. You chose survival. You chose me. And that matters more than you know." We stood like that for a long moment. Two people who'd been forced together by circumstance but were finding something real in the wreckage. Something that felt dangerous and precious and completely unexpected. "Teach me more," I said finally. "Everything you know about this world. I want to be more than just someone you protect. I want to be your partner." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. "Then let's get started." We spent the rest of the afternoon in his office, going through the files he kept on every family, every alliance, every deal that kept his empire running. He showed me the legitimate businesses, real estate holdings, restaurants, clubs, and the ones that weren't so legitimate, the money laundering operations, the protection rackets, the carefully maintained relationships with corrupt officials who looked the other way for the right price. "This is what I am," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "This is what you married. Not just a businessman, but someone who's built power on violence and fear and carefully calculated decisions about who lives and who dies. I know what you are. Do you? Because knowing intellectually and accepting emotionally are different things." He pulled out a file, opened it to reveal photographs that made my stomach turn. This is what happened to the men who attacked you, what I ordered Franco to do. The images were brutal. Bodies broken in ways that suggested hours of deliberate pain before death finally came. I should have been horrified. Should have seen only the monster everyone said Marco Vitale was. Instead, I felt that same cold satisfaction I'd felt the night I'd overheard him condemning them. They'd hurt me, and he'd made them pay. That was justice in his world, and I was part of that world now. I'm not afraid of you, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm afraid of what you make me capable of feeling, of how I don't feel guilty about this, of how I'm glad they suffered. That's not weakness. That's survival. He closed the file. This world doesn't reward mercy, Sienna. It rewards strength, decisiveness, the willingness to do what's necessary. You're learning that faster than I expected. Is that good or bad? It's both. It means you'll survive. But it also means you're becoming something you might not recognize when you look in the mirror. He pulled me closer. The question is whether you can live with who you're becoming. I thought about the girl I'd been 4 days ago. My father's daughter. Trapped but safe, living in a world where violence was theoretical and consequences belonged to other people. That girl would have been horrified by the photographs, by the satisfaction I felt knowing my attackers had suffered. But that girl was gone, beaten out of me in an alley, replaced by someone harder, sharper, willing to accept protection that came with blood-on its hands. I can live with it, I said, as long as I'm surviving instead of just existing. Marco kissed me then, and it felt like a seal, a promise, an acknowledgement of what we were both becoming. Two people forged by violence into something new, building something real from the wreckage of arranged obligation. Outside, night had fallen over the city. Somewhere out there, the Russos were planning their next move. Antonio was scheming to regain control over his son. Enemies waited in shadows for the right moment to strike. But here in Marco's office, surrounded by evidence of the empire he'd built and the violence that sustained it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. Mrs. Marco Vitale. Not a victim, not a transaction, but a partner learning to navigate a dangerous world. And God help anyone who underestimated me. Chapter 4, Blood and Boundaries. The nightmare started a week after the wedding. I'd wake gasping, heart hammering, the phantom sensation of hands grabbing me in the dark. Marco would pull me against his chest, murmuring in Italian until my breathing steadied, until the terror receded enough for me to remember where I was. Safe, protected, in a penthouse 30 stories above the streets where violence had found me. But safety felt like a cage some mornings. Franco's training intensified daily. By the end of the second week, I could break a chokehold, knew where to strike to drop someone twice my size, could field strip and reassemble a Glock in under 2 minutes. My body was transforming, lean muscle replacing softness, reflexes sharpening, the constant awareness of potential threats becoming second nature. You're a natural, Franco observed one morning after I'd successfully defended against 3 simulated attackers. Most people freeze when surrounded. You calculated the best escape route and executed without hesitation. Is that good? It means you'll survive. He handed me water. But it also means you're losing something softer, something most people don't want to sacrifice. I thought about that as I showered afterward, watching bruises fade and new ones appear. Franco was right. I was changing. The girl who'd run from her father's estate because she needed to breathe felt distant, unrecognizable. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, who assessed every room for exits and every person for threat potential. Marco noticed. "You're quieter," he said one evening as we dressed for a charity gala, the first public appearance as husband and wife. His hands were gentle as he fastened the diamond necklace around my throat, his grandmother's jewelry that felt like a collar, more guarded. Your world requires guards. My world requires awareness. That's different than shutting down. He turned me to face him, dark eyes searching mine. "Talk to me, Sienna. What's happening in that head of yours?" What was happening? I was learning to survive in a world where violence wasn't an aberration, but a constant, where my value was measured by how much damage enemies could do to Marco through me, where every smile had calculation, and every kindness came with strings attached. "I'm becoming what I need to be," I said finally. "Isn't that what you wanted?" "Not if it means losing who you are entirely." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "I married someone with fire, someone who pushed back even when terrified. Don't let my world extinguish that." The gala was exactly what I expected. Manhattan's elite pretending their money wasn't built on exploitation. Their power was maintained through carefully orchestrated violence. Women in designer gowns worth more than cars. Men in custom suits discussing deals that would never appear on tax forms. Everyone performing respectability while participating in systems that destroyed lives. We worked the room like politicians, Marco's hand never leaving the small of my back as he introduced me to business associates, rival family members, politicians who smiled while taking bribes. Each introduction felt like a test, people assessing whether I was an asset or liability, whether marriage had made Marco vulnerable or more dangerous. Mrs. Vitale, a woman perhaps 40, approached, champagne in hand and calculation in her eyes. Isabella Chun. My family controls operations in Chinatown. I recognize her from Marco's files, daughter of Chinwei, head of one of the 5 families. Ruthless, intelligent, with a reputation for strategic marriages that expanded territory without violence. "A pleasure," I said, matching her tone perfectly, polite but cool, acknowledging her status without deference. I was surprised to hear about the wedding, moving up the ceremony so suddenly. Her eyes gleamed. The Rousseau incident must have been quite motivating. My husband takes my safety seriously, as he should, though one wonders if that incident was truly random, or if someone wanted to test how far they could push before Vitale retaliated. She sipped her champagne. "These are dangerous times, Mrs. Vitale. Alliances shift. Boundaries blur. It's important to know who your real friends are." The veiled threat was clear. She was offering information, or perhaps alliance, in exchange for something unspoken. Before I could respond, Marco appeared at my elbow. "Isabella," he said smoothly, "I hope you're not trying to recruit my wife into your information network." "Would I do such a thing?" Isabella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I was simply welcoming her to our world, offering friendship if she needs it. My wife is all the friends she needs. After Isabella left, I asked quietly, "What was that about?" Isabella collects people, gathers information through strategic friendships, and uses it to expand her family's influence. Marco guided me toward the terrace, away from listening ears. She wanted to assess whether you're someone she can manipulate or someone she needs to fear. And what did she conclude? That you're more interesting than she expected. His expression was unreadable, which makes you either a valuable ally or a dangerous enemy. She hasn't decided which yet. We stepped onto the terrace, and the cool October air was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Other couples dotted the space, speaking in low voices, conducting the real business that happened at these events, the deals that couldn't be discussed in rooms with too many witnesses. "Do you ever get tired of it?" I asked suddenly. The constant performance, the calculation, never being able to just exist without measuring every word, every gesture, every day. Marco leaned against the railing, staring out at the glittering city. "But that's the price of power, Sienna. The moment you stop performing, someone exploits the weakness. The moment you let your guard down, someone puts a knife in your back. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also the only way I know how to survive." He turned to face me. Though lately, I've been wondering if there's another way. If having someone I trust, really trust, changes the equation. "And do you trust me?" "I'm starting to." His hand found mine, thumb tracing the wedding ring he'd placed there 2 weeks ago. Which terrifies me, if I'm honest, because trust is the greatest vulnerability in my world. The thing that gets you killed faster than anything else. Before I could respond, Franco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Mr. Vitale, we have a situation." The situation was my father. He'd been found an hour ago in his study, a bullet through his right kneecap and a message carved into his desk. Debts must be paid. We arrived at the estate to find it swarming with Marco's security team. My father sat in his leather chair, face gray with pain and shock, while a doctor worked on his leg. Blood soaked through bandages, pooling on the floor beneath him. "Sienna," he gasped when he saw me. "Thank God. They said they'd come back. They said if I didn't pay by Friday." "Who?" Marco's voice was ice. "Who did this?" "Russians. Volkov's people. I borrowed money 6 months ago, before the arrangement with you. Thought I'd be able to pay it back once the wedding secured the alliance." His hands shook. "But they want their money now. 500,000 by Friday, or they'll take it in blood." 500,000. The number hung in the air like an executioner's blade. "Why didn't you come to me?" Marco asked, voice dangerously quiet. "I thought I could handle it. Thought once we were family, once Sienna was your wife, they'd back off out of respect for you." My father's laugh was bitter. "I was wrong." Marco turned to Franco. "Find out who specifically ordered this. I want names, locations, everything. Already on it." After Franco left, Marco crouched in front of my father, and the casual violence in his posture made me shiver. "You have 2 choices. 1, you pay the debt yourself, somehow, and hope the Volkovs don't decide to make an example of you anyway. 2, I pay it, and you work for me until it's paid back. With interest." "What kind of work?" "The kind that uses your connections without requiring competence. You introduce me to people, facilitate meetings, smooth over relationships with old money families who still think I'm too new, too ruthless." Marco's expression was cold. "You become a bridge between my world and yours. That's worth 500,000. Barely." My father looked at me, desperation in his eyes. "Sienna." "Don't look at her," Marco interrupted. "This is between us. She's not your daughter anymore. She's my wife. You sold that relationship when you traded her for your debts. Now I'm offering to buy you out of a hole you dug yourself into. Take it or don't." The cruelty of it made my chest tight. But I understood what Marco was doing, establishing that my father had no claim on me anymore, that I existed in Marco's world now under his protection and his rules. "I'll take it," my father whispered. "Good. Franco will have the contracts drawn up. You'll sign them, the debt gets paid, and you start earning it back immediately." Marco stood, offered me his hand. "Come on, we're done here." I followed him out of the study, through the house where I'd grown up, past rooms full of memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. In the SUV, Marco pulled me against him, his face buried in my hair. "I'm sorry you had to see that. You saved his life. I bought his loyalty. There's a difference." He pulled back to meet my eyes. "Your father is a weak man who makes stupid decisions. He'll always need saving, always need someone stronger to bail him out. I did this because you're my wife and killing him would hurt you. But don't mistake pragmatism for mercy." "I don't." "Good." He kissed me, and it tasted like possession. Because in my world, mercy is a weakness that gets exploited. Remember that. The Volkov situation resolved itself 3 days later. I learned about it from the news. 3 bodies found in Brighton Beach, identified as members of Dmitry Volkov's organization. The reporter speculated about gang violence, territorial disputes, the usual explanations that let the city pretend organized crime was something distant and theoretical. But I knew better. "You killed them," I said to Marco that evening as we dressed for dinner. I resolved the problem. He adjusted his cufflinks with careful precision. "The men who shot your father won't be collecting any more debts. Dmitry received the message that attacking people connected to me has consequences he can't afford. And if he retaliates?" "He won't. Not yet. He'll wait, calculate, look for a better opportunity." Marco turned to face me. "That's how this works, Sienna. Action and reaction, violence and restraint. Everyone testing boundaries until someone crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. And where's that line for you?" "You." His expression was fierce. "Anyone who touches you, threatens you, even looks at you wrong. That's the line. Everything else is negotiable." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. Over the past 2 weeks, something had shifted between us. What started as obligation, as a transaction wrapped in wedding vows, had transformed into something more complicated, something that felt dangerous and precious in equal measure. "I need to tell you something," I said suddenly. "What?" "I'm not afraid of you anymore." I crossed where he stood. "I was at first terrified of what you were, what you'd make me become. But now I understand. You do terrible things to protect what's yours. But you're not cruel for cruelty's sake. You're not my father, making weak choices and expecting others to clean up the mess. You're someone who takes responsibility, who protects people even when they don't deserve it. I'm still a monster, Sienna. Don't romanticize what I am. I'm not romanticizing anything. I see you clearly. The violence, the calculation, the willingness to kill without hesitation. But I also see someone who held me while I had nightmares, who paid my father's debts even though he didn't have to, who's teaching me to survive instead of just hiding me away like property." I touched his face. "You're a monster, but you're my monster, and that matters." He kissed me then, and it felt different than before, not careful or controlled, but desperate, demanding, like he was trying to consume me entirely. His hands found my hips, pulling me flush against him, and I tasted need and possession, and something that might have been fear that I'd realize what he was and run. "We're going to be late for dinner," I murmured against his mouth. "Fuck dinner." He backed me toward the bed, his hands already working the zipper on my dress. Let them wait. We didn't make it to dinner. Spent the evening tangled in silk sheets instead, learning each other's bodies with an urgency that had been building since the wedding. Marco was careful around my healing ribs, but everywhere else he was demanding, possessive, taking me apart with skilled precision, and then putting me back together with unexpected gentleness. Afterward, lying in the dark with his arm around my waist, I felt something shift inside my chest, something that felt dangerous and irrevocable. I was falling in love with my husband. The realization should have terrified me. Love meant vulnerability, meant giving someone the power to destroy you completely. In Marco's world, love was the greatest weakness, the thing enemies exploited, the leverage that got you killed. But lying there in the darkness, listening to his heartbeat slow, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. "What are you thinking?" Marco asked quietly. "That this is more complicated than I expected. The marriage, everything." I turned in his arms to face him. "I married you because I didn't have a choice, because it was survival. But now I'm choosing you, every day, and that's terrifying." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. "Good, because I'm choosing you too, every day, even though it makes me vulnerable, even though my father says it's weakness, even though it goes against everything I've learned about survival." "Why?" "Because for the first time in 12 years, I have something I want more than I want power. Something worth fighting for beyond just maintaining control." His hand slid into my hair. "You've made me want to be more than just my father's son. Made me want to deserve what I have instead of just taking it." The admission made my throat tight. "I don't know how to love someone like you. Someone dangerous." "Then we'll figure out together." He kissed me softly. "Make our own rules. Build something that works for us instead of following someone else's blueprint." Outside, the city glittered like broken glass, and somewhere out there enemies plotted, rivals schemed, violence waited in shadows. But here in Marco's arms, I felt something I'd never expected to find in an arranged marriage. I felt home, Mrs. Marco Vitale, not a transaction, not a hostage, but a partner learning to love in a world built on violence. And God help anyone who tried to use that against us. Chapter 5, The Art of War. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, hand-delivered by a courier who looked more like a soldier than a messenger. Mr. and Mrs. Marco Vitale are cordially invited to the annual Autumn Gala hosted by the 5 families. Saturday, November 15th. Black tie required. Attendance is mandatory. Mandatory. I read aloud, turning the card over in my hands. That's an interesting choice of words for an invitation. Marco looked up from his laptop, jaw tightening when he saw what I held. "Fuck. I take it this is bad?" "It's a power play." He stood, crossing to where I sat curled in the library's leather chair. Once a year, the 5 families gather to discuss territory, resolve disputes, and make a show of unity for the benefit of everyone watching. It's part negotiation, part performance, and entirely dangerous. And we have to go. Refusing would signal weakness. Show that I'm afraid to be seen in public with you. That the Rousseau attack rattled me more than I let on. He took the invitation, studying it with a frown. They're testing us, seeing if we'll present a united front or if there are cracks they can exploit. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd learned to read the subtle shifts in Marco's expression. The way his jaw tightened when something concerned him, how his eyes went distant when calculating moves 3 steps ahead. Now, looking at that invitation, I saw a genuine worry. What happens at this gala? I asked. Politics dressed up as socializing. The 5 families, Vitale, Rousseau, Chun, Volkov, and Castellano, maintain the illusion of cooperation while positioning for advantage. Deals get made in private rooms. Alliances shift. Enemies smile and shake hands while planning each other's destruction. He met my eyes. And wives are assessed as either assets or vulnerabilities. Which category do I fall into? That depends entirely on how you perform. He pulled me to my feet, hands settling on my waist. I need you to be brilliant that night, Sienna. Charming but not weak. Intelligent but not threatening. Someone who makes other families think twice about considering you a target. No pressure, then. I'm serious. His expression was fierce. Philippe Rousseau will be there with his wife, Dmitry Volkov and Isabella Chun. Every person who wants to hurt me through you will be in one room, watching, calculating, looking for weaknesses. He touched my face. I need them to see what I see, someone strong enough to survive in this world, someone worth protecting but dangerous in her own right. The weight of his expectations settled over me like a shroud. 3 weeks of training with Franco had made me physically capable, but this was different. This was psychological warfare, the kind that required perfect control and strategic thinking. Teach me, I said. The next 2 weeks became an intensive education in the art of social combat. Marco brought in a woman named Elena Rostova, former socialite turned consultant, who'd spent 20 years navigating the upper echelons of New York society before her husband's empire collapsed and she'd pivoted to teaching others how to survive in shark-infested waters. First rule, Elena said during our initial session, circling me like a predator, never show fear. Even when you're terrified, especially when you're terrified. Fear is blood in the water, and everyone at this gala is a shark. She taught me how to read a room, identify allies and enemies through body language, interpret the subtle social cues that separated genuine interest from calculated manipulation, how to navigate conversations that were actually negotiations, deliver compliments that were really warnings, accept insults with grace while planning retaliation. You're Vitale now, Elena said, adjusting my posture with firm hands. That name carries weight, respect, fear, the promise of violent retaliation if you're crossed. But it also makes you a target. Every family will be assessing whether Marco Vitale's new wife is an asset or a weakness to exploit. And how do I prove I'm an asset? By being untouchable. Not cold. That makes you seem afraid. But controlled, measured. Someone who chooses her words and actions deliberately. She demonstrated, her entire demeanor shifting from warm to ice in a heartbeat. Like this. Pleasant but distant. Engaged but not vulnerable. I practiced until my face hurt from holding careful expressions, until I could deliver cutting remarks with a smile, deflect invasive questions with elegant redirection, project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Marco watched these sessions sometimes, leaning against a doorframe with inscrutable eyes. One evening after Elena left, he pulled me into his arms. You're transforming, he murmured, becoming someone formidable. Is that good or bad? Both. It means you'll survive, but it also means you're losing pieces of who you were. His hand slid into my hair. I need you to promise me something. What? That no matter how hard you become, no matter what armor you build to survive my world, you'll stay soft with me. Behind closed doors, when it's just us, don't let this world turn you into someone who can't feel anymore. The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. Over the past month, I discovered layers to Marco Vitale the world never saw. The man who held me during nightmares, who brought me coffee prepared exactly right without asking, who spoke in Italian when emotions overwhelmed him because English felt too exposed. I promise, I said, as long as you promise the same, that the man I see behind closed doors is real, not just another performance. He's real. He kissed me, and it tasted like truth, only with you. The night of the gala, I stood before the mirror, while a team of stylists transformed me into someone who looked like she belonged in Marco Vitale's world. The dress was a masterpiece, midnight blue silk that clung to every curve, high neck to project propriety, back cut dangerously low to suggest something more interesting underneath, hair swept up to reveal diamond earrings that had belonged to Marco's grandmother, makeup dramatic enough to be memorable, but not so much I looked like I was trying too hard. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, beautiful, controlled, the kind of person you couldn't help but notice but might be afraid to approach. Perfect, Elena pronounced, making final adjustments. You look like you could destroy a man with a glance. Is that the goal? The goal is making everyone at that gala wonder what Marco Vitale's wife is capable of. Keep them guessing. Keep them off balance. She handed me a small clutch. And remember, everything tonight is theater. Every smile, every word, every gesture. You're performing the role of the perfect Mafia wife. Don't break character. Marco appeared in the doorway, and something in his expression made my breath catch. He'd seen me dressed up before. We'd attended smaller events over the past weeks. But this was different. This was armor, carefully constructed for battle. Christ, he breathed, you're devastating. That's the idea. He crossed to me, hand settling on my bare back, sending heat through my skin. I need to warn you about tonight. Things may happen that seem extreme, conversations that sound like threats, interactions that make you uncomfortable. I can handle it. I know you can, but I need you to trust me, even when what I'm doing doesn't make sense, even when I seem cruel or dismissive. Everything tonight is strategy, Sienna. Nothing is personal. The warning made my stomach tighten. Will you be cruel to me? If I need to be, if it serves the larger goal of keeping you safe. His dark eyes held mine. Do you trust me? I thought about everything that had happened since the wedding, the training, the careful education and survival, the way he protected me even when it cost him. Thought about falling asleep in his arms and waking up safe, about learning to see past a monster everyone feared a man underneath. Yes, I said, I trust you. Then let's go to war. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the entire building rented for the evening, a show of collective power that made my skin prickle. We arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, joining a line of luxury vehicles disgorging Manhattan's most dangerous people dressed in their finest. Franco stayed close as we climbed the museum steps, his hand never far from the weapon concealed under his jacket. Other security teams dotted the entrance, cold-eyed men and women who assessed threats with professional efficiency. Inside, the Great Hall had been transformed into something from a dark fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in golden light. String quartet played from a raised platform. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. And everywhere, predators in evening wear. I recognized faces from Marco's files. Philippe Rousseau standing near the bar with a woman, who must be his wife, both of them radiating cold elegance. Isabella Chun holding court near the windows, surrounded by family members who moved like a coordinated unit. Dmitry Volkov speaking with someone I didn't recognize, his expression suggesting the conversation wasn't entirely friendly. Breathe, Marco murmured, his hand steady on the small of my back. You belong here. We made our entrance deliberately, descending the stairs with measured steps designed to draw every eye. I felt the weight of attention like physical pressure. Hundreds of people assessing, calculating, determining whether the new Mrs. Vitale was worth their interest or concern. Antonio Vitale materialized from the crowd, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed me. Sienna, he said, offering his hand rather than the familial kiss I'd expected. You look formidable. Thank you. I matched his cool tone perfectly. You look well. Marriage suits my son. He seems more focused lately. Antonio's eyes shifted to Marco, though I hope that focus doesn't become distraction. My focus, Marco said evenly, is exactly where it needs to be. The tension between them was palpable. Antonio still hadn't forgiven Marco for choosing me over the purely strategic marriage his father had envisioned. Still saw me as weakness rather than strength. Before the confrontation could escalate, a voice interrupted. Mr. Vitale, how delightful to see you here. Philippe Rousseau approached with his wife, both of them smiling with calculated warmth. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The scar through his eyebrow looked deliberately maintained, a reminder of violence survived and enemies vanquished. Philippe, Marco acknowledged. Marie, you both look well. As do you. And this must be the famous Mrs. Vitale. Philippe's eyes found mine, and I felt the assessment like a physical thing. The photographs don't do you justice. You're quite striking. You're too kind. I smiled, letting none of my actual feelings show. Though I'm surprised you recognize me, given our last encounter was somewhat less formal. The reference to the attack landed like a stone. Philippe's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. Calculation, wariness, the awareness that I wasn't going to pretend the violin hadn't happened. Yes, about that. He glanced at Marco. I hope we put that unpleasantness behind us. My offer of compensation still stands. If you've reconsidered, we haven't. Marco's hand tightened fractionally on my back, warning or reassurance. I couldn't tell, though I appreciate your continued concern for my wife's welfare. The words were polite, but the underlying threat was clear. Philippe's people had attacked me, and Marco hadn't forgotten or forgiven, regardless of what peace they'd negotiated. Marie Rousseau spoke for the first time, her voice cultured and cool. Marriage is such a delicate thing, isn't it? Requiring constant attention to maintain properly. The comment seemed innocent, but I heard the subtext. She was suggesting Marco's attention to me was a vulnerability, a distraction from more important concerns. I found marriage surprisingly uncomplicated. I replied smoothly. When both parties understand their roles and responsibilities, everything else falls into place quite naturally. How fortunate for you. Marie's smile was sharp. Not everyone finds the transition so seamless. We were speaking in careful code, each sentence carrying multiple meanings. This was the warfare Elena had prepared me for. Social combat, where every word was a weapon, and every response either gained ground or conceded it. If you'll excuse us, Marco said before I could respond. There are other guests we need to greet. We moved away from the Rousseaus, and I felt Marco's tension in the way his hand pressed against my back. You did well, he murmured, but be careful with Marie. She's more dangerous than Philippe in some ways, better at the social games, better at identifying and exploiting weaknesses. Noted. The evening continued in that vein. Carefully choreographed encounters that were really negotiations, conversations that were actually threats disguised as pleasantries. I met the other family heads, their wives, the power players who operated in the spaces between official alliances. Isabella Chin was particularly interesting. She assessed me with sharp intelligence, asked probing questions that seemed casual but were designed to determine how much I knew, how much influence I had with Marco. You've adapted quickly, she observed, sipping champagne. Most women from your background struggle with the reality of our world, but you seem quite comfortable. Comfort is relative. But yes, I'm adapting. Good. You'll need that adaptability in the coming months. Things are shifting. Territory boundaries, traditional alliances, the balance of power that's kept this city stable. She met my eyes. Your marriage upset that balance. Some people see it as opportunity. Others see it as threat. And which do you see it as? Both. She smiled. Which makes you very interesting, Mrs. Vitale. 2 hours into the evening, Marco was pulled into a private meeting with the other family heads. The actual business of the gala, conducted away from public view. Franco stayed close as I navigated the remaining crowd alone, feeling exposed without Marco's steady presence. I was standing near the windows, pretending to admire the city view, when Marie Rousseau appeared beside me. Quite the spectacle, isn't it? She said, gesturing to the party. All of us pretending we're civilized. that we don't order deaths over breakfast and bury bodies before dinner. I suppose every world has its pretenses. Indeed, though some pretenses are more dangerous than others. She turned to face me fully. Tell me something, Mrs. Vitale. Do you love him? Your husband? The question caught me off guard. That's rather personal. Humor me, because I'm trying to determine whether you're a liability or simply naive. Marie's expression was calculating. My husband is dangerous because he's cold, strategic, willing to sacrifice anything for advantage. But your husband, Marco, has a capacity for attachment. That makes him unpredictable, potentially weak, or potentially more dangerous, I countered. Someone with nothing to lose is reckless. Someone protecting what they love is ruthless. An interesting perspective. She sipped her champagne. I suppose we'll see which proves true. When someone inevitably tests whether Marco's love for you is strength or weakness, the threat was barely veiled. Before I could respond, Franco appeared at my elbow, his expression grim. Mrs. Vitale, you need to come with me. Now. He led me through the museum's corridors, away from the party, to a private gallery where Marco stood with Antonio and the other family heads. The tension in the room was suffocating. What's wrong? I asked. Marco's expression was thunderous. Your father, he's been arrested. The words took a moment to process. Arrested? For what? Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud. Antonio's voice was cold. The FBI raided his estate an hour ago, found evidence of illegal operations dating back years, including some that implicate our family's business interests. My stomach dropped. He was working for you. You said. I said he'd facilitate introductions, smooth over social connections, legitimate consulting work. Marco's jaw was tight. What I didn't know was that he'd been keeping records, documenting every transaction, every deal, every conversation, building a case file in case he ever needed leverage or immunity. He kept evidence against you, against all of us. Philippe Rousseau stepped forward, his expression murderous. Your father is a liability, Mrs. Vitale, one that threatens every family in this room. The question now is what we do about it. The implications were clear. They wanted my father dead, eliminated before he could trade his evidence for immunity, before he could destroy them all to save himself. No, my voice came out stronger than I felt. You can't just kill him. We can and will if necessary. Antonio's expression was stone. Unless you have a better solution. I looked at Marco, searching his face for some indication of what he wanted me to say, what the right answer was. But his expression was carefully blank, giving me nothing, forcing me to decide. This was the test. The real one. Whether I could be ruthless enough for this world. Whether I'd choose my father over the family I'd married into. There's another way, I said slowly, the plan forming even as I spoke. My father documented everything because he's afraid, desperate for insurance. But what if we give him better insurance? What if we make him more valuable alive than dead? I'm listening, Marco said. He has connections in the legitimate business world. People who don't know about his illegal dealings, who still respect the Blackwood name. We use that. Make him a bridge between the criminal and legitimate worlds. Someone who can facilitate deals that need the appearance of respectability, while keeping his evidence as leverage to ensure his cooperation. Isabellichan finished, understanding dawning. It's elegant, turns his documentation from threat to asset. It's also weak, Philippe argued. Leaving him alive leaves a loose end that could unravel everything. Killing him makes me a widow's daughter, I said, voice steady. Makes Marco look unable to control his own family. Leaves questions about whether he's going soft, whether marriage has made him sentimental. I met Philippe's eyes. But this way, everyone wins. You neutralize the threat, gain a valuable asset, and demonstrate that the Vitale family is strategic rather than merely violent. The silence that followed felt eternal. Marco studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, while the other family heads calculated whether my proposal served their interests. Finally, Dmitri Volkov spoke. The girl has a point. Dead, Thomas Blackwood is a problem. Investigation, questions, potential connection to all of us. Alive and controlled, he's useful. Agreed, Isabella said. One by one, the other heads nodded. Even Philippe, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Fine, Antonio said. But if he steps out of line even once, if he gives any indication he might cooperate with the FBI, he dies. No discussion, no appeals, just elimination. Understood, I said, even though agreeing felt like signing my father's death warrant with my own hand. The meeting dissolved, and Marco pulled me aside, his expression unreadable. That was either brilliant or incredibly stupid, he said quietly. I haven't decided which yet. I saved his life. You gave him rope. Whether he uses it to pull himself up or hang himself is his choice now. He cupped my face. But you did well. Prove you can think strategically under pressure, that you understand how this world works. Is that what tonight was about? Testing me? Everything is always a test, Sienna. Every conversation, every decision, every moment. He kissed me, and it tasted like pride and possession. But you passed. Prove to everyone in that room that you're not a weakness to be exploited, that you're someone worth respecting. We returned to the party, and I noticed a shift immediately, the way people looked at me differently now, with calculation rather than dismissal. Word had spread about what happened in that private room, about how I'd negotiated for my father's life, while simultaneously ensuring his compliance. I'd proved I could be ruthless, that I understood the game and knew how to play it. Mrs. Marco Vitale, not a victim, not a liability, but a player in her own right. And God help anyone who forgot it. Chapter 6. The Price of Power. My father's arrest made the morning papers. Front page of the business section, with speculation about financial crimes and connections to organized operations. The article carefully avoided naming Marco or the other families, but the implications were clear to anyone who understood how Manhattan's underworld operated. I read it over coffee while Marco conducted business in his study, surrounded by lawyers and accountants working to ensure nothing connected the Vitale empire to my father's documented crimes. Franco had retrieved the evidence from a safety deposit box my father kept. Years of records, photographs, wire transfers that painted a comprehensive picture of illegal operations spanning multiple families. Smart. Franco had observed, flipping through files. Stupid, but smart. He documented everything in case he needed leverage. Never considered that the leverage might get him killed. Now that evidence sat in Marco's safe, insurance against my father cooperating with federal investigators. As long as he remained silent, took whatever charges they threw at him, served his time without implicating anyone, he'd survive. The moment he considered a deal, turn informant to save himself, that evidence would destroy him completely. I'd save his life by ensuring his silence. The realization should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like I'd become exactly what this world demanded. Someone willing to sacrifice her father's freedom to protect her husband's empire. You're thinking too much again, Marco said, appearing in the library doorway. He looked tired, hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Shirt untucked in a way that made him seem almost human rather than control crime boss everyone feared. My father's going to prison because of me. Your father's going to prison because he's a criminal who got caught. You just determine how long he survives after sentencing. Marco crossed to where I sat, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. This is the world we live in, Sienna. Consequences aren't about fairness. They're about power, leverage. Who can protect whom? You protected him the only way possible, by ensuring he stays silent while serving time for crimes your family helped facilitate. Yes, he didn't deny it, didn't sugarcoat the truth. Welcome to the moral complexity of loving a monster. You get to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. The word loving made my chest tight. Over the past month, I've been carefully avoiding that truth, that what started as obligation had transformed into something more complicated, more dangerous. Something that felt like falling, even while knowing there was no safe landing. I need air, I said, pulling away from his embrace. I need to think. Then we'll go out, properly, not to events or meetings, but somewhere you can breathe. He checked his watch. Get dressed. Something casual. I'm taking you to see my world when it's not performing for the 5 families. An hour later, we stood in Red Hook, Brooklyn, a neighborhood I'd never visited, never had reason to visit in my previous life of charity galas and society pages. The warehouses here were half abandoned, graffitied, the kind of place Manhattan socialites pretended didn't exist. But there was life here, too. Small businesses, family restaurants, people who built communities in the spaces the wealthy ignored. This is where I grew up, Marco said, leading me down a street that smelled of salt water and industrial waste. Before my father moved us to Manhattan, before the empire became what it is now, this was home. We stopped in front of a small Italian restaurant, the kind with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles as candles, completely unpretentious and somehow more welcoming for it. An older woman emerged when we entered, her face lighting up with genuine joy. Marco, Dio mio, how long has it been? She pulled him into a hug that he returned with surprising warmth. Too long, too long. And who is this Bellissima? Sienna, my wife. The way he said it, with pride rather than possession, made something warm bloom in my chest. Sienna, this is Rosa. She taught me everything I know about real Italian cooking, and about surviving when you have nothing. Rosa assessed me with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Your wife, the Blackwood girl everyone's talking about. She switched to rapid Italian, speaking to Marco in a tone that suggested she was either blessing him or warning him. I couldn't tell which. Marco responded in the same language, his entire demeanor shifting into something softer, more open. This was the man behind the crime boss facade. Someone who still remembered where he came from, who maintained connections to a world that predated power and empire. Sit, Rosa commanded, switching back to English. I'll bring food. Real food, not that fancy nonsense they serve at those parties you attend now. The meal that followed was a revelation. Simple pasta, fresh bread, wine that tasted like sunshine and careful cultivation. Rosa joined us, telling stories about Marco as a boy, how he'd help in her restaurant after school, how even at 12 he'd been protective of the neighborhood kids, how he cried when his mother died and Rosa had held him while he shattered. He was a good boy, Rosa said, squeezing Marco's hand. Kind, before the world made him hard. The world required hardness, Marco said quietly. Being kind got people killed. See, this I know, but you remember, Caro, hardness is armor, not identity. You take it off sometimes, yes? You let yourself feel, or you become the monster everyone fears instead of the man who could be good. After we left the restaurant, full and slightly wine drunk, Marco walked me along the waterfront. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting everything in shades of gold and blood red, turning the city into something beautiful despite all the ugliness underneath. Why did you bring me here? I asked, because I needed you to understand something. He stopped, turned to face me with an intensity that made my breath catch. The man you married, the one who orders deaths and maintains an empire through violence, that's real, but it's not all of me. This, he gestured to the neighborhood behind us, this is also real. The boy Rosa remembers, the one who helped neighbors and protected kids and cried when his mother died. He's still here, buried under years of armor. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know what you're choosing when you choose me. Not just a monster everyone sees, but the person underneath. The one who's terrified he's becoming his father. Who wakes up some mornings and doesn't recognize himself in the mirror. Who loves you so much it feels like weakness and strength in equal measure. His hands cupped my face. I love you, Sienna. Completely. Probably since the moment you pushed back in that City Hall ceremony, maybe before. And I need to know if you can love me back. All of me, not just the parts that are convenient or safe. The confession made my throat tight. Love had been building between us for weeks, evident in every careful touch, every moment of vulnerability, every time we chose each other over easier options. But hearing him say it, raw and unguarded, it made everything real in a way I couldn't ignore. I love you, I said, and the words felt like surrender and victory simultaneously. Even though it terrifies me, even though loving you means accepting violence and moral complexity and making impossible choices. I love you, Marco. The monster and the man underneath. All of it. He kissed me then, desperate and demanding, like he was trying to consume me entirely. Right there on the Brooklyn waterfront, with Manhattan glittering across the water and salt air mixing with the taste of wine, I let myself fall completely. Take me home, I murmured against his mouth. Here, Manhattan? Wherever you are, that's home now. We returned to the penthouse to find Franco waiting with news that wiped the contentment from Marco's expression immediately. Philippe Rousseau is dead, Franco said without preamble. Murdered in his home 3 hours ago. His wife and 2 bodyguards also killed. Professional hit, clean execution. Marco went very still. Who? We don't know yet. But the timing is suspicious. Less than 48 hours after the gala, after your father's arrest. Someone's making a move. The Volkovs? I asked, remembering Dimitri's calculating expression at the party. Possibly. Or the Castellanos positioning for advantage while the Russo territory is vulnerable. Franco pulled out his tablet, showing crime scene photos that made my stomach turn. Whoever did this wanted to send a message. This wasn't about eliminating Philippe quietly. It was about demonstrating power. Marco studied the photos with cold calculation. Call an emergency meeting. All family heads. Tomorrow noon, neutral ground. We need to determine whether this was internal warfare or external threat. And if it was internal, if one of the families is making a play for territory, then we're about to witness the first real war the city's seen in 20 years. Marco's expression was grim, and everyone will be forced to choose sides. After Franco left to make arrangements, I found Marco standing by the windows, staring out at the city like he could see through buildings of the violence brewing underneath. This changes everything, he said quietly. How? Philippe kept the Rousseau family unified. Without him, there'll be infighting over succession. His cousins, his lieutenants, they'll all position for leadership. That instability will spread. Create opportunity for other families to expand territory, settle old scores, renegotiate boundaries. And where does that leave us? Depends on whether we want to expand or maintain status quo. He turned to face me. The strategic move will be taking Rousseau's Western territory. Consolidate power, demonstrate strength, send a message that the Vitale family capitalizes on opportunities. But expansion means war. Means putting everyone I care about at risk while managing a territory we're not equipped to control. He crossed me, and I'm not sure I want to build empire if it means risking you in the process. The admission made my chest ache. Don't make that decision because of me. Don't let love make you weak. Love doesn't make me weak. It makes me selective about which battles to fight. His hands found my waist. I spent 12 years building power because that's what my father demanded, what survival required. But I never asked myself what I actually wanted. What would make me happy beyond just maintaining control? And what do you want? This. He pulled me closer. You safe. A life that's more than just strategy and violence. Maybe even a future that doesn't end with me getting killed in some territory dispute. The vulnerability in his voice was staggering. This was Marco Vitale admitting he wanted something beyond power, wanted peace, wanted happiness, wanted a life with me that didn't require constant warfare. Then let's build that, I said, but smart, strategic. We don't expand Rousseau territory, but we make sure whoever does owes us the opportunity. We position ourselves as kingmakers rather than conquerors. Something that looked like pride flickered across his expression. You're thinking like a Vitale now. I am a Vitale, for better or worse. He kissed me, and it tasted like promises and possibilities. Like maybe we could build something that lasted in a world designed to destroy everything soft. The emergency meeting happened in a neutral warehouse in Long Island City. Technically no one's territory, overseen by lawyers who specialize in mediating disputes between families. All 5 family heads attended, though with Philippe dead. The Rousseau contingent was represented by his brother Michel, who looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. I attended as Marco's wife. sitting slightly behind him but present, a statement that I was involved in decisions, that my presence meant something beyond just decoration. "We're here to determine accountability," Antonio Vitale began, his voice carrying authority even in this neutral space. "Philippe Rousseau was killed in a manner suggesting professional execution. This affects all of us, threatens the stability we've maintained." "It was of all calves," Michel Rousseau said, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Dimitri wanted Philippe's territory, wanted to expand beyond Brighton Beach. This is his move." Careful with accusations, Dimitri Volkov replied, his accent thick but controlled. "I had no reason to kill Philippe. His death creates instability that serves no one. If I wanted territory, I'd negotiate, not assassinate." "Then who?" Isabella Chin asked. "Who benefits from Philippe's death and the chaos it creates?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Every family had potential motive. Rousseau territory bordered everyone's holdings, represented opportunity for expansion. But no one wanted to admit considering it, because admission meant suspicion. "Perhaps," Marco said carefully, "we're asking the wrong question. Not who benefits, but who wants us fighting amongst ourselves? Who gains from the 5 families turning on each other? You're suggesting external threat?" Antonio's expression was skeptical. "I'm suggesting we don't assume it's internal warfare until we have evidence. Because if we start accusing each other without proof, we'll fracture exactly the way someone wants. Fighting over territory while a real enemy positions for attack." "And what do you propose?" Isabella asked. "Investigation before retaliation. We pool resources, share intelligence, determine who actually ordered the hit. Then we respond collectively." Marco's voice was steady. "But we maintain current territory boundaries. No one moves on Rousseau holdings until Michel has time to consolidate leadership. That leaves us vulnerable," Dimitri argued. "Rousseau territory without strong leadership invites external threats. Then we help Michel strengthen his position, provide support, ensure smooth transition." Marco glanced at me, and I understood what he was communicating. This was a strategic move we discussed, positioning as kingmakers rather than conquerors. In exchange for future cooperation, favorable terms on shared operations. Michel Rousseau studied Marco with calculation. "You want to become my biggest ally while my family is vulnerable. That's either generous or calculated." "It's both," Marco said flatly. "I'm offering stability when you need it most. In exchange, I expect loyalty, favorable terms, and cooperation in shared interests. That's business, not charity." The negotiation continued for hours. Terms, boundaries, agreements about shared intelligence and coordinated response if external threats materialized. By the time we left, Marco had positioned himself as Michel's primary supporter, gaining influence over Rousseau operations without firing a single shot. "That was brilliant," I said in the SUV heading back to Manhattan. "That was survival." Marco looked exhausted. Philippe's death could have triggered war. Instead, we've created temporary stability and positioned ourselves for influence when the real power struggle begins. When, not if. Michel won't hold leadership. He's weak, scared, doesn't have the ruthlessness required. Within 6 months, someone stronger will challenge him. When that happens, we'll be positioned to support whoever serves our interests best. He met my eyes. "Welcome to the long game, Sienna. This is how empires really work. Not through violence, but through strategic patience." 3 days later, my father was formally charged with money laundering and racketeering. His lawyer, paid by Marco, though that fact never appeared in any official documentation, negotiated a plea deal. 20 years, eligible for parole in 12 if he maintained good behavior, and never testified against anyone. I visited him in holding before his transfer to federal prison. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by orange jumpsuit and the weight of consequences he'd finally couldn't escape. "You saved my life," he said when I sat across from him in the visiting room. "I ensured your survival. That's different. I know what you did, what you negotiated." His voice broke. "I know you could let them kill me. Should have let them kill me after what I did. But you saved me anyway. I saved you because Marco gave me the choice. Because he let me decide whether you deserved mercy." I met his eyes. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. You sold me to save yourself. You documented crimes to buy insurance without considering the consequences. You created the situation through weakness and poor decisions. I know. Good. Because here's what happens now. You serve your time. You never speak to investigators, never consider cutting deals, never do anything that might threaten the people I love. And in 12 years, when you're eligible for parole, maybe I'll have forgiven you enough to advocate for your release. Tears tracked down his face. I'm sorry, Sienna, for everything. I know, but sorry doesn't change anything. Actions change things. Choices change things. I stood. Choose wisely for the next 12 years. Your life depends on it. I left him there, crying in an orange jumpsuit, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The girl who'd run from her father's estate 6 weeks ago wouldn't have been capable of such calculated cruelty. But she was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone shaped by Marco's world into something that could survive it. Mrs. Marco Vitale. A woman who could negotiate her father's imprisonment with the same strategic calculation she'd use for business deals. A woman who loved her husband more than she feared becoming a monster. A woman who understood that in this world, mercy was weakness unless it served a larger strategic purpose. Marco was waiting when I returned to the penthouse, and he pulled me into his arms without questions, without judgment. Just held me while I processed what I'd become. I'm turning into someone I don't recognize. I whispered against his chest. You're becoming someone strong enough to survive. That's different than losing yourself. He tilted my face up. Do you regret it? The choice you made. I thought about my father crying and holding, about the life I'd had before. Safe, privileged, ignorant of the violence underlying everything. About who I was now, harder, more capable, someone who could make impossible choices and live with the consequences. No, I said honestly, I don't regret any of it. Good. He kissed me, and it tasted like acceptance. Because I need you exactly as you are, strong enough to stand beside me, ruthless enough to survive this world, soft enough to remind me I'm still human underneath the armor. That night, we made love with desperate intensity, like we were trying to prove we were still capable of tenderness despite everything. And afterward, lying in the dark with Marco's heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I realized something profound. I'd married a monster to survive, but I'd fallen in love with a man underneath. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. Chapter 7. When Monsters Fall in Love. Winter settled over Manhattan like a shroud. Early darkness, bitter cold, the kind of weather that made violence feel more inevitable. 6 weeks after Philippe Rousseau's murder, the investigation had stalled. No evidence, no witnesses, no clear motive that pointed definitively to any one family. But the instability of his death created continued spreading like infection. Michel Rousseau was proving exactly as weak as Marco predicted. His leadership fractured the family into competing factions. Cousins who thought they deserved power, lieutenants who'd been loyal to Philippe but saw no reason to follow his ineffectual brother. Territory that had been secure under Philippe's iron control became contested ground, and everyone watched, calculated, waited for the right moment to exploit the chaos. It's going to collapse, Franco said during our morning briefing, laying out intelligence reports that painted a comprehensive picture of Rousseau family disintegration. Michel can't hold leadership. The question is who moves first when it falls apart. The Volkovs are positioning, Marco observed, studying surveillance photos. Dmitri's been meeting with Rousseau lieutenants, offering better terms, more protection. He's building loyalty before making his move. So we counter, I said, tracing territorial boundaries on the map Franco had spread across Marco's desk. Offer those same lieutenants better terms than Dmitri. Make them choose between Russian expansion and Vitale protection. Both men looked at me, and I felt the weight of their assessment. Over the past 6 weeks, I've become increasingly involved in strategy sessions, not just observing, but contributing. Learning to think like they did, to see opportunities where others saw chaos. That starts a bidding war, Franco pointed out, drives up the cost of securing loyalty, but also prevents Volkov expansion, I countered. which is worth the investment if it means containing Russian operations to Brighton Beach instead of letting them spread into Manhattan. Marco studied the map for a long moment, then nodded. Do it, but carefully. I want these approaches to seem like we're offering opportunity, not desperately trying to prevent Volkov expansion. After Franco left to make arrangements, Marco pulled me against him, his face buried in my hair. You're getting dangerously good at this. At what? Thinking like a crime boss. His hands settled on my waist. Strategic, calculating, willing to spend money to prevent enemy advancement. My father would be impressed if he weren't so threatened by you. Antonio had indeed become increasingly hostile over the past weeks. He saw my growing influence with Marco as dangerous, worried I was making his son soft, distracted him from the ruthless expansion Antonio believed necessary. Their relationship had deteriorated to the point where Marco now avoided his father whenever possible. Your father hates me, I said. My father hates anyone who makes me question his authority. He raised me to be a replica of himself, cold, strategic, willing to sacrifice anything for power. You make me want something different. Marco turned me to face him. You make me want to be better than he was. And that threatens everything he built. Am I causing problems between you? You're exposing problems that were always there. I just ignored them because challenging my father meant risking everything. His expression was fierce. But I'm not afraid anymore. Of him. Of choosing differently. Of building something that's mine instead of just inheriting his empire. The declaration made my chest tight with emotion I didn't have words for. What does that look like? Building something different? I don't know yet, but I know it includes you. Includes making decisions based on what serves us, not just what maintains power for power's sake. He kissed me softly. It includes choosing love over obligation, which probably makes me weak by his standards, but I don't care anymore. That evening, we attended a gallery opening in Chelsea, one of those events where Manhattan's elite pretended to appreciate art while actually networking and conducting business. Isabella Chen had orchestrated it, using her family's art collection as pretext for gathering the 5 families in neutral, public space. She's testing something, Marco murmured as we entered the gallery. Isabella doesn't do anything without strategic purpose. This gathering means she's positioning for a move. We were proven right within an hour. Isabella found us admiring a painting I didn't understand, abstract splashes of color that apparently represented something profound about human suffering. She looked elegant in black silk, her expression giving nothing away. Mr. and Mrs. Vitale, thank you for coming. She gestured to the painting. What do you think? Does it speak to you? It speaks to someone with disposable income and questionable taste, I said, and her laugh was genuine. I like you, Mrs. Vitale. You don't pretend to understand things that are deliberately obtuse. She glanced around, confirming no one was within listening range. Walk with me. There's something we should discuss. We moved through the gallery, stopping periodically to maintain the pretense of viewing art. Isabella's guard stayed at a distance, allowing privacy, while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. The Rousseau situation is deteriorating faster than anticipated. Isabella began without preamble. Michel will be dead within 2 months. His own family will kill him rather than let him drag them further into chaos. When that happens, there will be war over succession. We're aware, Marco said carefully. Are you aware that the Volkovs and Castellanos have been meeting secretly, discussing an alliance to divide Rousseau territory between them? Her eyes gleamed. They're planning to move the moment Michel falls. Carve up his holdings before anyone else can respond. And you're telling us this because I don't want Russian and Italian expansion boxing in Qin territory. Because splitting Rousseau holdings between 2 families upsets the balance of power we've maintained. She stopped in front of a sculpture, twisted metal that supposedly represented violence. And because I'm offering an alternative alliance. Chun and Vitale, working together to ensure Rousseau territory gets absorbed strategically rather than violently. The proposition hung in the air between us. An alliance with Isabella Chen meant access to Chinatown operations, shared intelligence networks, coordinated response to threats. But also meant owing favors, making concessions, tying our family's interests to hers. What would this alliance require? I asked. Mutual protection, shared intelligence, coordinated response to Volkov Castellano expansion. Isabella's expression was calculating. And when Michel falls, we support you in leadership over Rousseau's Eastern Territory. You get Western holdings. We maintain current power balance while preventing Russian expansion. You want us to help you expand territory. I want us to prevent chaos. There's a difference. She met Marco's eyes. Your father would jump at this opportunity. Expansion, increased power, positioning for dominance. But you're not your father. You're more selective about which battles to fight. Meaning, I think you care more about stability than expansion. More about protecting what you have than grabbing what you don't need. She glanced at me, and I think your wife has influence over that decision, which makes her very interesting. After Isabella left, Marco and I moved to the gallery's terrace. Too cold for most guests, ensuring privacy. She's right about the alliance benefits, Marco said, staring out at the city. Chun partnership would strengthen our position significantly. But it also commits us to expansion we don't need, to taking territory that will stretch our resources and create new vulnerabilities. He turned to face me. What do you think? You've proven your strategic instincts. I want your opinion. The trust implicit in that question made my throat tight. I think Isabella is offering stability wrapped in expansion. She wants Chin growth, but needs our help to achieve it without triggering open warfare. Agreed. So the question is whether stability justifies the cost. I thought about everything we'd built over past 2 months. The relationship that had transformed from obligation to partnership. The life we were creating that balanced violence with something softer. I thought about what Antonio would choose versus what we actually wanted. Counteroffer, I said slowly. We provide intelligence support, coordinated response to external threats, but we don't take territory. Isabella can have Eastern Rousseau holdings if she wants them, but we don't expand westward. We maintain current boundaries while strengthening alliance. That gives her expansion without requiring ours. Yes, but it also positions us as kingmakers again. We're powerful enough to grant territory rather than needing to take it. That's a stronger message than expansion. I met his eyes. Your father would call that weak. I'm calling it strategic. Marco studied me for a long moment, something fierce and possessive in his expression. Then he pulled me against him and kissed me hard, desperate, like I'd just proven something he'd been hoping for. God, I love you, he breathed. You think exactly the way I wish I'd learned to think years ago. Strategic, but not greedy. Powerful, but not reckless. Is that a yes to the counteroffer? That's a yes to building something different than what my father built. Something sustainable rather than just perpetually expanding. He rested his forehead against mine. With you, always with you. We presented the counteroffer to Isabella 2 days later. She accepted after 30 minutes of negotiation. Terms, boundaries, commitments for mutual protection. By the time we left her office, we'd forged an alliance that would reshape Manhattan's power structure without requiring the violence Antonio would have demanded. He's going to be furious, Franco observed when Marco briefed him on the terms. Let him be furious. I'm not building his empire anymore. I'm building mine. Marco's expression was resolute, and mine doesn't require conquering everything in sight. Antonio's fury manifested that evening when he appeared at the penthouse unannounced. His face red with rage I'd never seen him show before. You turned down territorial expansion? He bellowed, not bothering with pleasantries. Isabella offered you Rousseau holdings on a silver platter, and you declined? I negotiated alliance without unnecessary expansion. Marco corrected, voice cold. We gained in partnership, shared intelligence, coordinated protection, without stretching resources over territory we don't need. You're becoming weak. She's making you weak. Antonio's finger stabbed toward me. I told you marriage would distract you, make you sentimental. But you insisted. And now you're making decisions based on feelings instead of strategy. I'm making decisions based on sustainable growth versus reckless expansion. That's not weakness. That's evolution. It's weakness. Antonio's fist slammed on Marco's desk. I built this empire by taking every opportunity, exploiting every weakness, expanding constantly. That's how you maintain power. That's how you survive. That's how you burned out and nearly destroyed everything through overextension. Marco stood, moving around the desk to face his father directly. I'm not you. I'm not building empire for empire's sake. I'm building something sustainable that doesn't require my death or destruction to maintain. Because of her. Antonio's gaze slid to me, cold and venomous. Because you've let a woman influence decisions that should be purely strategic. Because I found someone who thinks strategically without needing to conquer everything in sight. Marco's voice dropped to something dangerous. And if you can't accept that I'm running this family differently than you did, then maybe it's time you step back entirely. The silence that followed was suffocating. Antonio stared at his son with something that looked like betrayal. Like Marco had just committed the unforgivable sin of choosing his own path. You're going to regret this, Antonio said finally, voice shaking with controlled fury. When the Volkovs expand, when other families see you passing on opportunities, when they realize you've gone soft, you'll regret choosing her over power. I already chose her over power the moment I moved up our wedding to protect her. This just makes it official. Marco's expression was unyielding, and I don't regret it, won't ever regret it. Antonio left without another word, and the door closing behind him felt like the end of something, a relationship, an era, the version of Marco Vitale who'd been built in his father's image. After he was gone, I found Marco standing by the windows, tension radiating off him in waves. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Don't be. That's been coming for years. I just kept avoiding the confrontation, because challenging him meant choosing between his approval and my own path. He turned to face me, but I'm done choosing his approval, done building what he wants instead of what I want. And what do you want? This. He pulled me close. You. A life that's more than just endless expansion and power plays. Maybe even... He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his expression. Maybe even a future. Kids. Something beyond just surviving until someone kills me. The admission made my breath catch. We'd never discussed future beyond immediate survival, beyond navigating the constant threats that defined our world. But hearing him say it, hearing him want something as normal as children, as a real life, made something warm bloom in my chest. You want kids? I asked. I want everything I thought I couldn't have. Normalcy. Peace. A reason to build something that lasts beyond my death. His hands cupped my face. I want to deserve you. Want to be worthy of the choice you made in that City Hall ceremony. You already are. I'm not. Not yet. But I'm trying to be. He kissed me, and it tasted like promises and possibilities. Help me build it. Not my father's empire, but something new. Something that's ours. That night, we made love with tender intensity. Not desperate or possessive, but reverent, like we were acknowledging what we become to each other. And afterward, lying in the dark with Marco's hand splayed possessively over my stomach, I let myself imagine it. A future that included more than just survival. That included children, stability, a life where violence was managed rather than constant. I love you, I whispered into the darkness. I love you more than I knew I was capable of loving anything. His arms tightened around me. You saved me, Sienna, from becoming my father, from building empire at the cost of everything human, from forgetting why any of this matters. We saved each other. Yes, we did. Michel Rousseau died 3 weeks later, shot in his own office by a cousin who'd grown tired of weak leadership. The murder triggered exactly the chaos Isabella had predicted, family fracturing into warring factions, each one claiming legitimate succession, territory becoming contested ground. The Volkov-Castellano alliance moved immediately, dividing Western Rousseau holdings between them in a coordinated assault that left bodies in the streets and businesses burning. It was ugly, violent. The kind of warfare that made headlines and forced the city to acknowledge the criminal underbelly it usually pretended didn't exist. But Eastern Rousseau territory, the section bordering Chin holdings, remained untouched. Isabella moved in with precision, her forces establishing control before anyone could challenge. Within 48 hours, she'd absorbed Rousseau's eastern operations into Chin territory with minimal violence. and the Vitale family, despite predictions of weakness, maintained our boundaries without loss. The Chun Alliance provided intelligence that prevented Volkov expansion toward our territory. Our restraint in not grabbing Russo holdings was interpreted as confidence. We were strong enough not to need expansion, secure enough to grant it to allies. Antonio had predicted we'd be seen as weak. Instead, we've been seen as strategic. Your wife was right, Franco observed during the aftermath briefing. Positioning as kingmaker rather than conqueror sent exactly the message you wanted. Don't tell her that, Marco said, but he was smiling. Her ego is already insufferable. I heard that. I called from where I sat reviewing intelligence reports. After Franco left, Marco pulled me into his lap, both of us exhausted from days of crisis management, but relieved it had resolved without destroying everything we'd built. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For helping me become someone I'm proud to be. For showing me there's another way beyond just replicating my father's choices. His hand found mine, thumb tracing the wedding ring he'd placed there 3 months ago. For choosing me every day, even when this world makes it difficult. Always, I promised, even when it's difficult, especially then. Outside, the city glittered in winter darkness, and somewhere Antonio Vitale was probably raging about opportunities lost and weakness indulged. But here in Marco's arms, I felt only certainty. We'd built something real from arranged obligation, something that could survive violence and chaos and family disapproval, something that looked a lot like love. Chapter 8, Empire 2. Spring came in Manhattan like a promise. Cherry blossoms in Central Park, longer days, the kind of weather that made violence feel like an aberration rather than inevitability. For months after Michel Rousseau's death, the city had settled into a new equilibrium. The Volkovs controlled former Rousseau Western Territory, though their expansion had cost them 3 dead lieutenants, operations disrupted by federal investigations, Dmitri himself looking older and more worn than before. Isabella Chun had consolidated Eastern holdings into her empire with surgical precision, strengthening her family's position without the chaos that plagued Russian operations. And the Vitale family had maintained our boundaries, gained a powerful ally, and emerged from the crisis with reputation intact. We were seen as stable, strategic, powerful enough not to need expansion. Exactly what Marco had been building toward. The board meeting is in 20 minutes, Franco said, appearing in Marco's study doorway. Everyone's already gathering. I looked up from the files I'd been reviewing. Legitimate business reports of the real estate holdings that fronted less legitimate operations. Over the past months, I've become increasingly involved in the business side of Marco's empire, learning the intricate web of companies and shell corporations that kept everything running. Ready? Marco asked, offering his hand. As I'll ever be. The board meeting was actually a gathering of Marco's key lieutenants, the men who ran various operations, who'd been loyal to his father before transferring that loyalty to him. Most of them were twice my age, had spent decades in this world, and weren't particularly thrilled about Marco's new wife attending strategy sessions. But they'd learned to respect my input after I correctly predicted the Rousseau collapse and suggested the Chin alliance that had proven so beneficial. We entered the conference room to find 8 men waiting. Franco, plus 7 others whose names I'd memorized along with their histories, strengths, weaknesses. Marco had taught me to assess everyone as potential ally or threat, and these men fell somewhere in between. Gentlemen, Marco said, taking his seat at the head of the table. I sat beside him, not at the opposite end where Antonio's wife had sat during his reign, but next to Marco, signaling partnership rather than decoration. Let's begin. The meeting covered operations across the board, real estate developments, restaurant fronts, port operations where most of the real money moved, numbers, projections, issues that needed addressing. Marco ran it with efficient precision, making decisions quickly when needed, deferring to expertise when appropriate. An hour in, the conversation shifted to expansion opportunities. The Castellano family is overextended, one lieutenant reported. They took too much Rousseau territory too fast. Can't manage it all effectively. Their southern holdings are vulnerable. We could move in with minimal resistance. The room fell silent, everyone waiting to see how Marco would respond. This was a test. Whether he'd maintain the restraint he'd shown during the Russo crisis, or whether he'd finally pursue the aggressive expansion his father would have demanded. "No," Marco said simply. "Sir, with respect, this is a significant opportunity. Prime territory, minimal cost of acquisition. It's also unnecessary overextension that would stretch our resources the same way it's stretching Castellano's." Marco's voice was firm. "We're not expanding just because we can. We expand when it serves strategic purpose, when we can manage new territory effectively, when the benefits outweigh the costs. Your father would have. My father nearly destroyed this family through reckless expansion." The words landed like stones. "I'm not my father, and we're not building empire through constant conquest. We're building something sustainable." The lieutenant sat back, clearly unhappy but unwilling to challenge further. Others around the table exchanged glances, some approving, some skeptical, all recalculating their assessment of Marco's leadership. However, I said into the silence, and every eye turned to me, we should monitor Castellano vulnerability, not to exploit it ourselves, but to ensure no one else does in ways that threaten our interests. If they collapse under overextension, we want to control who absorbs those holdings. Kingmaker strategy again. Franco observed with something like approval. It's worked well so far. I met the skeptical lieutenant's eyes. We're more powerful positioning as a family that grants territory than the one that constantly fights for it. That's not weakness. That's evolution. After the meeting, as lieutenants filed out, one of the older men, Carlo, who'd been with Antonio from the beginning, stopped beside my chair. "You're changing him," he said quietly, "making him softer than his father. I'm helping him be smarter than his father. I corrected. There's a difference. We'll see." But his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Just remember, in our world, soft gets you killed, no matter how smart it seems at the time." After he left, Marco pulled me against him, his face buried in my hair. "He's not wrong, you know, about the risks of restraint. Neither are we, about the risks of constant expansion. No, but sometimes I wonder if I'm building something sustainable or just postponing inevitable collapse." He pulled back to meet my eyes. "What if restraint is weakness? What if my father was right about needing to constantly expand or die? Your father burned out, alienated his son, built an empire that nearly destroyed him. That's not success. That's survival at any cost." I cupped his face. "You're building something different. Something that might actually last beyond your death. That's worth more than territory." "Is it? Because some days it feels like I'm gambling everything on being right about a strategy no one else in this world follows." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. "Then we're gambling together. And if we're wrong, at least we'll have built something worth losing." That evening, we had dinner with Isabella Chun at her family's restaurant in Chinatown. Neutral ground, but territory she controlled completely. She'd requested the meeting, and Marco had agreed because refusing would signal weakness. Isabella looked elegant as always, wearing red silk that somehow made her seem both beautiful and dangerous. She greeted us with warmth that was probably calculated but felt genuine. "Thank you for coming. I want to discuss our alliance, ensure we're aligned on strategy going forward." She gestured to a private room in the back. "Shall we?" Over expensive wine and food that was actually excellent, Isabella outlined her vision for the next phase of their partnership. Coordinated response to federal investigations that were heating up, shared intelligence on emerging threats, potential opportunities for legitimate business ventures that could front their operations. "The world is changing," she said, refilling our wine glasses. "Federal enforcement is getting more sophisticated. Public awareness is increasing. The old ways of operating are becoming untenable. We need to evolve or we'll be destroyed. What are you suggesting?" Marco asked. "Legitimacy. Real legitimacy. Not just fronts. We take the profits from our operations and invest in businesses that can stand scrutiny. Real estate development, tech startups, entertainment ventures. Build empires that last beyond us, that our children can inherit without the violence. That's a significant shift. It's necessary evolution. The families that survive the next 20 years will be the ones who adapt, who build legitimate power structures alongside illegal operations. She met my eyes. Your wife understands this, I think. She comes from legitimate wealth, knows how that world operates. That's valuable perspective. I thought about my father's empire, legitimate businesses that had fronted questionable dealings, connections that had seemed respectable but were built on exploitation. Thought about the uncomfortable truth that legal and illegal operations weren't as different as people pretended. It's possible, I said carefully, but it requires significant capital, time, patience. You can't just throw money at legitimate ventures and expect them to succeed. You need real expertise, legitimate partners, patience for returns that take years instead of weeks. Which is why I'm proposing we pool resources. Chun Capital, Vitale connections to old money families, shared expertise. Isabella's expression was calculating. Build something together that's bigger than what either family could achieve alone. Marco studied her for a long moment. You're proposing a merger, not just alliance, but actual partnership. I'm proposing evolution. We maintain separate operations for now, but build shared legitimate ventures that eventually become a foundation for something new. She leaned forward. Our children shouldn't have to choose between violence and poverty, Marco. They should inherit empires that can operate in daylight. After dinner, driving back to Manhattan, Marco was quiet in a way that suggested deep thought rather than simple tiredness. What do you think? He finally asked. I think Isabella is right about evolution being necessary. But I also think she's positioning for long-term dominance. Building legitimate empire while maintaining criminal operations gives her power in both worlds. So we decline? No, we negotiate better terms. Ensure we're equal partners rather than junior associates in her vision. I turned to face him. But Marco, she's right about one thing. If we want children, if we want to build something that lasts, we need to start transitioning now, before federal enforcement catches up with us. You really want this? Children, legitimate empire, all of it. I want a future that doesn't end with you getting killed in a territory war. That doesn't require our children to choose between violence and poverty. I touched his face. I want what Isabella described. Empire that can operate in daylight. That's worth building. Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. Then let's build it. Together. We spent the next 2 months negotiating terms with Isabella, structuring legitimate ventures that could eventually support both families. Real estate developments in emerging neighborhoods, tech investments in startups that needed capital, entertainment ventures that could launder money while actually turning profits. It was complex, requiring lawyers and accountants who specialize in making criminal money look legitimate, partnerships with people who asked no questions as long as returns materialized. But slowly, piece by piece, we built the foundation for something new. Antonio watched from a distance with increasing fury. He'd effectively been sidelined, still technically head of the Vitale family, but everyone knew Marco made the real decisions now. The old guard who'd been loyal to Antonio split, some following him into irrelevance, others recognizing that Marco's approach was the future. He's planning something, Franco warned during one of our morning briefings. Meeting with old allies, people who think you've gone soft. I don't know what specifically, but he's positioning for a challenge. Let him challenge, Marco said, voice cold. I've been building toward this. Consolidating power, ensuring loyalty, creating structures that survive even if he tries to disrupt them. When he makes his move, it'll fail. And if it doesn't, then I'll handle it the way I handle any threat to what I built. Marco's expression was grim. But I prefer not to have to kill my father. That tends to create complications. The confrontation came 3 weeks later. Antonio appeared at the penthouse with 4 men, old lieutenants who'd been loyal to him since before Marco took over. They looked prepared for violence, hands near weapons poorly concealed under expensive suits. We need to talk, Antonio said without preamble, about the direction you're taking this family. About the choices you're making that endanger everything I built. I'm taking this family toward survival, toward evolution, toward something sustainable. Marco's voice was calm but steel underneath, which threatens you because it proves you were wrong about constant expansion being necessary. I was right. Territory, power, expansion. That's how we survived. That's how we maintained position. Antonio's voice rose. But you've let that woman convince you otherwise. Let sentiment replace strategy. Sentiment didn't convince me to forge alliance with Isabella Chun. Strategy did. Sentiment didn't make me decline Castellano territory. Sustainability did. Marco stood, and the temperature in the room dropped. You built empire through violence and constant warfare. I'm building something that might actually last beyond my death. Those are different visions. Your vision gets us killed. Your vision nearly destroyed us through overextension. Marco's hands curled into fists. So here's what's going to happen. You retire. Officially. Publicly. You step back, live comfortably off dividends from legitimate ventures, and stop undermining decisions you no longer have authority to make. And if I refuse, then I remove you, forcibly if necessary. Not a threat, a statement of fact. I've been building toward this, Father. Consolidating power, ensuring loyalty, creating structures that survive your challenge. You move against me now, you'll fail. And failure in our world has permanent consequences. The silence that followed was suffocating. Antonio's men looked uncomfortable, hands near weapons, but clearly uncertain whether they were willing to start a war in Marco's own penthouse. Antonio himself looked older suddenly, diminished by the realization that his son had outmaneuvered him completely. You'd kill your own father? Antonio asked, voice shaking. I'd remove a threat to what I built. That you happen to be my father makes it tragic, not impossible. Marco's expression softened fractionally. Retire, Father, with dignity. Live comfortably. Watch grandchildren when they come. But stop trying to drag this family back to strategies that nearly destroyed it. Antonio stared at his son for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Fine, I retire. But understand this, Marco. When your restraint gets you killed, when your sentiment becomes vulnerability someone exploits, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. I'll live with that risk. Can you live with retirement? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. Yours is between comfortable retirement and permanent removal. Marco's voice was cold. Choose wisely. Antonio left with his men, and the door closing behind him felt like the end of an era. The old generation stepping aside, making way for something new. After they were gone, I found Marco standing by the windows, staring out at the city with an expression I couldn't read. Are you okay? I asked. I just forced my father into retirement under threat of death. I should feel victorious. Instead, I feel... He paused, searching for words. Empty, like I just killed something that was already dying. You freed yourself from a shadow. That's different than killing him. Is it? Because right now it feels like I just murdered the relationship I spent my entire life trying to earn approval from. He turned to face me. He's right about one thing. My choices might get me killed. Restraint, sentiment. Choosing you over pure strategy. That's all vulnerability in our world. But it's also strength. You're building something worth protecting instead of just empire for empire's sake. I crossed him, took his hands. Your father survived through violence. You're trying to survive through evolution. That's harder but potentially more lasting. And if I'm wrong, if restraint gets us killed, then we die having built something real, having loved each other, having tried to be better than what this world demands. I touched his face. That's worth the risk. He kissed me then, desperate and demanding, like he was trying to consume me entirely. And I let him, because we'd built something together that was worth fighting for, worth dying for, if it came to that. Mrs. Marco Vitale. Not a hostage, not a transaction, but a partner who'd helped her husband become someone better than his father, someone who'd chosen love over power, and who'd somehow impossibly found both. 2 weeks later, I missed my period. The pregnancy test I took in the penthouse bathroom showed positive, and I stare at those 2 lines for 10 minutes trying to process what they meant. A child, our child, the future we've been building made suddenly terrifyingly real. Marco found me sitting on the bathroom floor, still holding the test. Sienna? What's? He saw the test, saw my expression, and understanding dawned. "You're pregnant." "I'm pregnant," I confirmed, voice shaking. "We're having a baby." He sank to the floor beside me, pulled me into his arms, and for the first time since I'd known him, Marco Vitale cried, not from pain or loss, but from joy so profound it overwhelmed him completely. "We're having a baby," he repeated, voice breaking. "A child who'll inherit everything we're building, who'll grow up in a world we're trying to make better. Are you happy?" I asked, because I needed to hear him say it. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "and happier than I knew I could be. And so grateful you chose me, chose to build something real from what started as obligation." We sat there on the bathroom floor while evening turned to night, planning futures and possibilities, imagining a child who'd inherit empire built on both violence and love, who'd know their father as both monster and man, who'd learn that survival required ruthlessness, but humanity required choosing when to be gentle. "Things are going to change," Marco said eventually. "I'll need to accelerate the transition to legitimate operations. Can't raise a child while operating primarily through illegal ventures. The risk is too great. So we build faster, push the legitimate investments, transition to criminal operations, create something our child can inherit without the violence. That's going to take years. Decades, maybe. Then we have decades." I touched my still flat stomach. This child deserves a father who dies of old age, not a territory war, who builds empire in daylight, who proves that evolution is possible. "You really think we can do it? Transform completely?" "I think we can try. And trying is enough." That night, lying in bed with Marco's hand splayed protectively over my stomach, I thought about everything that had happened since that night in the rain 4 months ago. The attack, the forced wedding, the transformation from hostage to partner, learning to survive in a world that wanted to destroy everything soft. But somehow we'd built something real, something that could survive violence and family disapproval and federal investigations, something that looked like love and felt like home. Mrs. Marco Vitale, pregnant with the future, building empire that could operate in daylight, and proving that monsters who fall in love without losing their teeth. They just learn when to bear them and when to smile. Epilogue. 6 years later. The security at our Westchester estate was discreet but comprehensive. Cameras hidden in landscaping, guards who looked like groundskeepers, panic rooms disguised as wine cellars. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked like typical wealthy family paranoia. To those who understood our world, it was necessary protection. I watched from the terrace as our daughter Elena, 5 years old with Marco's dark eyes and my stubborn chin, played in the garden with her younger brother Luca, who just turned 3. They were chasing butterflies, squealing with delight, completely unaware that the gardener trimming roses nearby was actually Franco's nephew, trained in tactical response and armed with enough firepower to repel a small army. "They're beautiful," Marco said, appearing behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. His hands settled on my stomach, 8 weeks pregnant with our 3rd child, though we hadn't told the children yet. Happy, terrified, I admitted, 3 children in a world that still wants to hurt us, that still operates through violence even as we're trying to evolve past it. But happy. I leaned back against him, despite everything, because of everything. The past 6 years had been transformation incarnate. The legitimate ventures Isabella and Marco had built were flourishing, real estate developments, tech investments, entertainment companies that were actually profitable beyond just money laundering. The criminal operations still existed, but they'd been systematically reduced, compartmentalized, managed by trusted lieutenants, while Marco focused increasingly on legitimate empire. Antonio had died 2 years ago. Heart attack, peaceful in his sleep, exactly the kind of death he'd never expected to have. His funeral had been attended by 500 people, and Marco had delivered a eulogy that was honest about their complicated relationship, while still honoring what his father had built. "He made me," Marco had said, standing before the casket, "through expectation and disappointment, through demanding I become strong enough to survive this world. I spent years resenting him for it, but without him, I wouldn't have been capable of building what I've built, of protecting what I protected. So thank you, Father, and I'm sorry we couldn't find peace before the end. Isabella Chen had become our closest ally. Her children played with ours at carefully supervised playdates. Her family's interests aligned so completely with ours that people joked about Chen Vitale dynasty. She'd married off her oldest son to a Volkov daughter last year, forging an alliance that had reshaped the entire power structure of New York's underworld. The 5 families were now 3. Chen Vitale Volkov on one side, Castellano struggling to maintain relevance on another, and various independent operators trying to survive in the spaces between. It was more stable than it had been in decades, which meant less violence, fewer bodies, more opportunities for evolution. But evolution was slow, and violence still erupted sometimes. 3 months ago, a Castellano lieutenant had made a move on one of our legitimate developments, trying to extort construction delays, threatening workers. Marco had responded with calculated precision. The lieutenant disappeared. Castellano leadership received a message about boundaries, and the development continued without further incident. I'd asked if he'd ordered the death himself. No, Marco had said. Franco handled it. I'm trying to keep my hands clean for the children's sake. But I approved it, knew what would happen, made the choice that violence was necessary. That's still complicity, Sienna. I'm still responsible. But you're trying, building something better, even while acknowledging some things still require the old ways. Is that enough? To try. It has to be. Now, watching our children play, I thought about the world we were building for them. Not perfect. Violence still lurked underneath legitimacy. Enemies still schemed. Federal investigations still threatened everything. But better than what we'd inherited. More sustainable. More human. Mama, Elena called, running toward the terrace with Luca toddling behind. We found a butterfly with blue wings. Come see. I descended the stairs carefully. 6 years of marriage to Marco Vitale had taught me constant vigilance, even in what should be safe spaces, and followed my daughter to where the butterfly perched on a rose bush. It's beautiful, I said, crouching beside her. Like you, Mama. Elena touched my face with sticky fingers. Papa says you're the most beautiful butterfly he's ever caught. The metaphor made me smile, typical Marco, teaching our children through carefully constructed stories. I'd been the butterfly he caught, though the reality was more complicated. We'd caught each other, really, trapped each other in orbit until neither could imagine existing separately. What else does Papa say? I asked that you saved him. That before you, he was just surviving, but after you, he started living. Elena's expression turned serious in that way young children have when repeating important things they don't entirely understand. He says you're magic. I'm not magic, Piccola. Just stubborn. Stubborn magic, she insisted, and kissed my cheek before running back to chase more butterflies. Marco appeared beside me. Luca perched on his hip, telling her family secrets. Just truths. He set Luca down to join his sister, then pulled me against him. You did save me, you know, from becoming my father, from building empire that would have destroyed me eventually, from forgetting what actually matters. We saved each other. Yes, we did. His hand found my stomach again. And now we're building something that might actually outlast us. Legacy beyond just violence and power. Do you think they'll forgive us? I asked quietly. Our children, when they're old enough to understand what we really are, what we've done to survive and protect them. I don't know. I hope so. He turned me to face him. But even if they don't, even if they reject everything we built, I won't regret any of it, because I got to love you. I got to build something real with you. I got to be more than just my father's son. Before I could respond, Isabella Chen appeared in the garden doorway, her daughter Meilin trailing behind. Sorry to interrupt family time, Isabella said, though her expression suggested this wasn't a social call. But we have a situation that requires discussion. The FBI is escalating investigations. They're looking at our real estate developments, try to connect them to criminal operations. How serious? Serious enough that we need to accelerate timeline for full transition to legitimacy. Another 2 years of gradual evolution won't work if they're actively investigating. She glanced at the children playing. We need to go completely legitimate within 6 months, or we all go to prison. Marco's jaw tightened. That's barely enough time to properly transition operations without losing millions. Losing millions is better than losing everything. Isabella's expression was grave. I'm calling meeting tomorrow. All families, all operations. We decide now whether we commit fully to legitimacy or we prepare for war with federal enforcement that will probably lose. After Isabella left, Marco and I stood in silence, watching our children play while contemplating the choice ahead. 6 years of careful evolution, of building legitimate empire alongside criminal operations, of trying to transform into something that could survive daylight. All of it coming to crisis point. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to choose our children, their future, the life we've been building. He pulled me closer, which means full transition, even if it costs us everything we've built criminally, even if we lose money, power, influence, as long as we don't lose this. This being our family, our children, the life we carved from violence and obligation and transformed into something real. Then we transition, fully, completely, no half measures. I looked up at him, and we deal with the consequences together. Always together, he confirmed. The meeting the next day was contentious. Family heads arguing about whether full legitimacy was surrender or evolution, whether they could afford to abandon criminal operations that had sustained them for generations. Dmitry Volkov was particularly resistant, his empire still heavily dependent on illegal ventures. But Isabella presented the evidence. Federal investigations intensifying, public awareness increasing, the writing on a wall that said adapt or die. And slowly, reluctantly, the families agreed. 6 months to go completely legitimate, to transition all criminal operations to legal alternatives, to clean their empires so thoroughly that no investigation would find evidence of wrongdoing. It was ambitious, probably impossible, but it was necessary. Marco threw himself into the transition with focused intensity. Meetings with lawyers and accountants, restructuring businesses, severing connections to anything that couldn't withstand scrutiny. Some ventures were simply abandoned, years of work written off as the cost of evolution. Others were legitimized through complex restructuring that made them appear clean even if their origins were dirty. I managed our personal investments, ensured our children's futures were secure even if everything else collapsed. Established trusts that couldn't be touched by investigations, properties held through shell corporations that led nowhere, insurance policies that would support our family even if Marco and I both ended up in prison. Because that was possible now. Real possibility. The FBI had evidence, not enough to prosecute yet, but enough to justify continued investigation. And if they dug deep enough, found the right connections, even our carefully constructed legitimacy might not protect us. What happens if we fail? I asked Marco one night, lying in bed after another 18-hour day of restructuring. If the FBI finds evidence, if we can't transition fast enough, then I go to prison. You raise our children. You use everything I built to ensure they have futures. He pulled me closer. But you stay free. That's non-negotiable, Sienna. Whatever happens, whatever evidence they find, it points to me, not you. I've been structuring it that way from the beginning. I won't let you take the fall alone. You will, because our children need at least one parent. His voice was firm. Promise me, if it comes to that, if someone has to go down, you let it be me. You stay free for Elena and Luca and this new baby. Promise me. The demand made my throat tight. But he was right. Our children needed protection more than we needed to fall together. I promise, I whispered. But Marco, it won't come to that. We'll make the transition. We'll survive this. We always do, he said, but I heard the uncertainty underneath. The transition took 8 months instead of 6, longer than planned but ultimately successful. By the time federal investigations intensified, the Vitale, Chun, and Volkov families had divested from all obviously criminal operations. What remained was a network of legitimate businesses that could withstand scrutiny, that appeared clean even if their origins were questionable. The FBI found nothing prosecutable. They knew, must have known, that these families had been operating criminal enterprises for generations. But knowing and proving were different things, and Marco had been careful, methodical, ensuring that evidence led nowhere useful. The investigation eventually closed without charges. We'd survived, not through violence, not through power, but through evolution, through choosing to transform rather than fight, through accepting losses in the short term for survival in the long term. "It's really over," I said when we received confirmation that investigations had closed. "This investigation is over. There will be others." Marco pulled me against him, but we bought time. Years, maybe, long enough for our children to grow up in relative peace. Long enough to build something that can truly last. Was it worth it? Everything we gave up, every sacrifice, every dollar lost, every piece of power we abandoned. He tilted my face up. Because we get to watch our children grow up without me getting killed in a territory war. Because we built something real that might actually survive us. Because I get to love you without constantly fearing someone will use that against me. Our third child, another daughter we named Sophia, was born 3 weeks later. Perfect, healthy, with lungs that suggested she'd inherited her mother's stubborn determination. Elena and Luca were fascinated by their new sister, gentle in that way young children are with babies, protective in ways they'd learned from watching Marco and me protect them. "We made this," Marco said, holding Sophia while our other children slept. "We built this family, this life, this future, from arranged obligation and violence and impossible circumstances. We made something real." "We did," I agreed, leaning against him to admire our daughter. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for choosing me, for helping me evolve, for loving me even when I was still becoming someone worth loving. Always, I promised, even when it was hard, especially then." Outside, spring was becoming summer. The estate gardens blooming with flowers Isabella had helped me plant, fruit trees that would provide harvest for years to come, evidence of roots put down and growth sustained. We'd built empire from violence, transformed it through evolution, protected it through ruthless strategic thinking. But underneath all of that, we'd built something simpler and infinitely more precious. A family, a home, a love that had survived everything this world could throw at it. Mrs. Marco Vitale. Not a transaction, not a hostage, not even just a partner, but a woman who'd helped her husband become better than he'd been raised to be, who'd built empire that could operate in daylight, who'd proven that monster could fall in love, could choose evolution over violence, could create futures worth more than power, and who'd done it all while remaining exactly who she was. Stubborn, strategic, strong enough to survive in a world that wanted to destroy everything soft. The butterfly Marco had caught, who'd caught him right back, and who'd taught him that being caught wasn't imprisonment. It was finally finding home. The end.